Okay, so welcome everybody. It is Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency's Board of Directors meeting. Before Chair Perry welcomes and convenes the meeting, I am going to remind everybody a few housekeeping rules. All votes are done via roll call. There are opportunities for public to comment throughout the meeting. There are a couple of tricks to know about that. If you are joining us via the computer interface, you please use raise hand in Zoom webinar. And if you're joining us via phone, press *9. And I think that is all I had to say. I'm going to turn it over to Chair Perry.
Okay, welcome everybody. Call to order the May 27th meeting, 2021. I have a roll call, please.
Certainly. We go Director Engfer.
Here.
Director Koenig.
Here.
Director McPherson. Let me check this. I think we're going to keep going for now. Director Cassidy.
Here.
Director Koopman.
Present.
Director Pollock.
Here.
Director Dillis.
Here.
Director Mayhood.
Here.
Director Smalley.
Here.
Director Stiles.
Here.
And Chair Perry.
I am also here.
Wonderful. We're going to go over to alternate column.
Oh, yes.
Alternate Director Baskin. Alternate Brown. Alternate Hayes. Alternate Lind. Alternate Henry.
Here.
And alternate Eckwall. Okay, let me take a quick look if maybe Director McPherson has joined us. Not at this point, but we do have a quorum, Chair Perry.
Okay, thank you. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
Why? None from staff.
Okay. Oral communications on matters not on the agenda. This is when anyone can speak up, especially members of the public, to address something on their minds that is not on tonight's agenda. Raise your hand or we'll open up a line if you're there.
We see no hands and nobody's wishing to speak.
Okay, thank you. So first order of business, we have a board vacancy. We are filling the well owner representative alternate. They have self-selected somebody, so it's just a matter of us voting on the approval. It is Cara Hutchison, and she would be the well owner representative alternate member for 3 years, term effective immediately. Do I have a motion?
This is Engfer. I'll move the recommendation.
Do I have a second?
I'll second Dillis.
Okay, Jack Dillis seconded. Doug Engfer motioned. And can I get a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Director Engfer.
Aye.
Koenig.
Aye.
McPherson. Let me see if, no. Cassidy. Director Cassidy. You might be muted.
Uh-oh, that's not a ringing endorsement.
Okay. I will come back to here. Koopman.
Aye.
Pollock.
Aye.
Dillis.
Aye.
Mayhood.
Aye.
Smalley.
Aye.
Stiles.
Aye, and welcome.
And Perry.
Aye.
Okay, Director Cassidy. I did not get your
Aye.
vote. Okay, wonderful.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. You are official, Cara. Welcome to the board. And unfortunately, now you have to be quiet. Okay, and I see Dale was there. I know Dale was sick, and you look great. And I'm hoping everything is Wonderful. Feeling good, Dale?
Yes, feeling much better. Thanks, Chris. Glad to be back.
Great, good to have you. All right, so 2.2 is the Monitoring Network Enhancement Contract Award. We're going to recommend, well, the recommendation is to approve and authorize staff to execute the contract in the amount of $199,970 with Montgomery and Associates for monitoring network enhancement. Does anyone have any comments from the board to start with? Okay, hearing none. Is there any comment from any public members that are?
Chair Perry, we do have a short presentation prepared by Georgina King to just give a little bit of a background on this, why we're doing it, and what's involved in this phase of work.
Okay, just for the record, sure.
Okay, Georgina, you should be able to start your screen share.
You see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Here we go. Evening, everybody. I'll try go through this fairly quickly. We did. This is as per it says, in response to some of the comments we also got on the monitoring network, and we're going to go over that a little bit later on in the meeting today. But specifically on why we have these 10 new monitoring wells that are going to go in, and this is because we identified pretty early on as we were working on the basin setting that there were these data gaps, and there are two types of data gaps that we have in this basin, and one is that we don't really understand some of the surface water groundwater interactions. I'm going to go into that as well a little bit in more detail, but also the deep Butano, you've heard me talking about that. We really don't know what those groundwater levels are, because the wells that we have in them are pretty much screened in both Lompico and Butano. So we want to get a more representative well into the area where the extraction is happening out of the Butano. So that is in the hydroconceptual model or hydrogeologic conceptual model. That was a gap that we identified. In the regulations, and that first slide was telling you, it's just showing you places in the regulations where the data gaps are talked about. And here are some other, and this is the main section where some of you had provided comments on improving the monitoring network. And so these 10 wells that were selected, and we didn't have sufficient monitoring sites in some areas. And if you don't, and you are supposed, if there are data gaps that you have to say in the plan implementation, that's the bottom part here, that what steps would you take to fill those data gaps? So the GSP can identify them, and then you can do them, say, next year or the year after. Or in our case, we happened to get grant funding last year, I guess it was last year, and we were able to put in some monitoring wells. So I'm going to take this opportunity to also talk a little bit about how DWR is going to evaluate and assess the GSPs that we're going to be submitting ours in January. So they have 2 years after submission to do their assessment, and then they're going to come back with a score, and they're going to say the GSP is approved, it substantially complies with SIGMA regulations and what's required, and they might include some recommendations for improvement, and those need to be taken seriously. You need to address those recommendations as quickly as you can, and then your GSP is approved there. If it's incomplete, that means that they've identified deficiencies that preclude it from being approved, but that the department thinks that those deficiencies can be addressed in 180 days. So you have 180 days to fix that. And if you fix it according correctly and to their approval, then it gets moved up into the approved category. And if it's not, it gets downgraded to inadequate, possibly there. And if it's inadequate, this is when DWR and the State Water Resource Control Board will consult on whether a GSP is truly inadequate, and that's when their state intervention happens. So they can take over managing the basin already at that point. But really, that's not what they want to do. That is a temporary thing, because the goal is to really get that basin back into local control. So these are the things that can happen. And there is a guideline that they put out early in the process of doing GSPs. And this here shows you, there are some basic pass or fail criteria. And then there's they have to go through this checklist to make sure that all of these things are included. And today, when I go over the kind of overview of some of the sections that you're going to be reviewing coming up here in the next few weeks, that you have to hit all of these things. You have to address all of these items that they put down. And one of the ones high on the list there is whether the GSP identifies reasonable measures and schedules to eliminate data gaps. They realize that you can't have all the data in the basin when the GSP is written, but that those need to be identified and planned how you're going to fill them. And that when you're looking at data gaps and when you're always doing the GSP, you're not considering just the benefits of one user type. It's all the beneficial users and users of groundwater. And so this over here, just it's the approved, the incomplete, and the inadequate. And you can see over here, this is where there's the state intervention could happen. And so identifying data gaps is part of the regulations. We have to do it. And I showed this very early on. This is the map showing all the locations in the basin where there are wells with groundwater level data. And it's very apparent that there's some big areas over here where there is no data, because a lot of that is in areas where there's private wells, and they typically are not monitoring their groundwater levels. And the areas where there is data is typically where there are the bigger production wells by San Lorenzo Valley Water District, Scotts Valley Water District, and Mount Herman. And so that they really are the ones with the long-term monitoring. So in consultation with the county and the two water districts and Balance Hydrologics and ourselves early in the process of GSP development, we got together to figure out where we should put additional wells. If there's Proposition 68 grant funds available, where would we put them and what would be the rationale? Why do we need them? And so the next one over here is showing you where we did end up putting them. And the 10 new wells are the circles that you see. They are, some of them are in the Santa Margarita, the yellow ones. Some of them are in the Monterey, because we really have no data. We have one well in the entire basin that has some levels on that. And then, and they're also located where there is a lot of private pumping. The little black dots are where the concentrations of private pumping are. And what else is on here? There was also, as part of that Proposition 68, there was also some equipping of gauges that were already in place. We just added some new equipment to, and then there were, I think, there were 3 of those, and then there were 2 new stream gauges put in, which are the red triangles. So the blue triangles are those that the equipment was just upgraded. So these, and so what we end up here is out of the 10 wells, 4 of them fall into the San Lorenzo Valley Water District service area, 1 into Scotts Valley Water District, and that's a very deep Butano well over here. And then there are 5 that are in non-water district areas. And we'll be talking a bit more about why that's relevant. Also, as part of the grant, data loggers were included. And so all the 10 new monitoring wells are going to get data loggers so that we can continuously monitor groundwater levels in those wells. And then we added another 4 data loggers there, and those would go to representative monitoring wells that don't already have data loggers. And it turns out that those would be the 4 San Lorenzo Valley Water District wells that are representative and have sustainable management criteria associated with them. And then also under the grant, there's also training on data logger use and processing of the data that is provided by ourselves to the district and to county staff. So these new wells will most likely be completed, all 10, by 2022. And then that means in the first annual report, hopefully, actually not even the first annual report, because that's due April 2022. So probably the second annual report, the data will be included from these new wells. And the working group made up of the member agencies and the city of Santa Cruz have been discussing, and then the city of Santa Cruz is not really relevant to this discussion, because the discussion was about who's going to monitor these wells. And initially we've been talking about that where the well is located, in which service area, they would be responsible for on monitoring those wells. The ones that fall out of the district areas, that would be covered by the county of Santa Cruz, and there's 5 wells there. What it would require is, because they have data loggers in them, that they probably only require quarterly visits to download the data and to take manual measurement, and then staff would process those data loggers, and we'd train them how to do that. The monitoring wells generally have very low maintenance needs. If maintenance is needed, we would propose that the agency, that the GSA, is responsible for covering those costs. And then the data is uploaded to the regional data management system, along with all sorts of other agency monitoring data that we're going to be putting in there. And as a kind of receptacle for all the data for the basin, when we do the annual reports, we just go to one place and download that. But all these details really are included in section 5 on plan implementation. Let me see. I'm going to not talk about all of this, but the bottom one is the reason, or the monitoring network can be changed over time. We have to monitor for as long as there's a GSP. We have to monitor the basin. You can add wells, you can remove wells, but provided there's the rationale behind it. But the shallow wells monitoring the groundwater gradients near the streams. The reason why 6 of those 10 wells are really to do with monitoring the shallow groundwater adjacent to streams, because it's important not only for confirming whether the stream is gaining or losing. So is the gradient, the groundwater next to the stream, is it above the stream level or is it below the stream level? And that's one thing. There are other ways to figure that out, but more importantly, the reason why we need these wells, these shallow wells, is to establish a relationship between the groundwater levels and depletion of surface water from groundwater use. And so quantifying that stream flow depletion is what it's all about. And we can't do that without wells. And that's a requirement of Sigma. It's how the sustainable indicator of depletion of interconnected surface water is measured. So, and we don't know enough about it, which is why we have 6 wells in there. We only have 2 wells that we are using as representative monitoring points for that indicator, but one of them is not really a very good one, and the other one, you know, it's next to Bean Creek. That's good, but it hasn't provided us very good data so far. So again, here, this is a regulation. So the stream flow depletion that Sigma talks about, the GSAs need to identify the rate or volume of surface water depletions caused by groundwater use that has an adverse impact on beneficial uses of the surface water and may lead to undesirable results. So this is also a data gap, because we don't know enough about this. And a lot of GSAs are in the same situation where they have to do a lot more work over the next few years to figure this out. And this basin is one of them, although there's a lot of other work that's been done on understanding where it is connected. There's no work being done on trying to quantify the depletions from groundwater extraction. Okay, now I'll give this one over to Sierra because it's on the funding a little bit, explain a bit more about the funding.
Yes. So this was already mentioned earlier, but when we were identifying these data gaps, it was also the same time that we were considering whether or not we would apply for the Prop 68 grant funding. The identification of the data gaps really was part of our impetus for the application. So if you recall all the way back to, I think in the fall of 2019, when we were bringing this information to you, we mentioned that we were applying for the funds. We received $644,000, which requires a 25% match. The $644,000 is meant to completely cover the cost of this, of the installation of the monitoring wells and the additional stream gauges that Georgina was talking about. The 25% cost share was is coming from items that were already in the budget for the agency, some of the facilitation and the outreach services. And like Georgina mentioned, the ongoing cost we expect to be fairly minimal. There is a cost because this is an obligation, something that we have to do, but it is not. The big cost associated with these is the upfront construction cost, and that is what is covered by the grant. And that's really all I have to say.
Okay, thanks, Sierra. And that really concludes that little bit more explanation. And I see that you had also a proposal in the packet. So there is a lot more information in there, of course. Okay.
Thank you very much, Georgina, Sierra. Are there now any other, or there was no questions before, but there are any questions now? More information sometimes brings more questions.
I'm checking hands. I don't see any.
There's Gail.
Okay, there's one now. Gail.
You're on mute.
Pardon me. Sierra and Georgina, you mentioned that the ongoing monitoring costs are not very much, but what is not very much? Do you have an estimate of what they are? And is this something that would be taken on by existing staff, or is it somebody that we would need to hire a consultant to do?
We wouldn't need to hire a consultant. We could, if we wanted to, consider that as an option as an agency, but the ongoing costs are, like Georgina mentioned, I should mention for the wells. It's the cost of going out once every quarter. So probably a couple hours of staff time to download the data, to take a measurement, a hand measurement, and then a little bit of post collection processing. So we're talking about maybe For the county, where we have 5 that we would take on for the agreement that we take on those in the the non-water service areas, I would expect it would be about a day's worth of staff time once a quarter, so 4 days of work a year. Probably less for the water agencies, and you do already have staff that do this kind of work. And I would hope for the district that the fact that the data loggers would be coming in on the wells that you're already monitoring might help offset some of the additional time of having to do some new sites. The stream gauges right now would likely need a consultant. Balance has been doing this for this agency now for 2 years. They've been doing the same work for the San Lorenzo Valley Water District and the county for many years before that. We can always revisit how we go about funding and distributing that work, but I don't think that anybody right now, at least none of the member agencies, have the staff available to do the stream gauge work. Although it's not a lot. Once the gauges are in, it's not a huge amount of work, but I would guess probably $20,000 a year, to throw a number out there that I can't really back up, but that's what I would say off the top of my head. So.
Okay, I think Doug wins the next question award.
Thanks, Chris. There was some discussion in Montgomery's information in the packet about the potential of siting some of these wells on private property. I don't know if our sites are all chosen yet, but if we are siting any on private property, what kind of arrangements are typical there? And if there's any money changing hands, is that also covered in the budget that's in the grant monies?
I could start this, Georgina, and then you can take it if I miss something, but we would need easements for these because we need access long-term. Perhaps for the stream gauges, access agreements would be sufficient, but for the wells, certainly where we're doing, we're really investing in capital on a piece of land, we need to make sure that that is protected. So we would get easements. Easements for the size that we talk about for a monitoring well are, if we needed to do it on private property, I've spoken to the real property folks at the county, and in their experience, it's usually under $1,000 to get the easement. If money does have to change hands, which it doesn't necessarily. Obviously, ideally, we will do as much of this as we can on public land. That's always the goal, but the water doesn't really know land ownership the same way that we do. So we'll have to do, if necessary, then we would have to go and actually develop easements that would allow not only access for the construction and the equipment, but then long-term access for us to maintain, to visit and maintain the wells, as well as actually keeping the well on the property.
Thank you, Sierra. Jack?
Yes, I have a question, but first I want to just follow up on that, if I may. Just if we do need to acquire easements, is that and a property owner were to not go along with that, this agency does not have the power of eminent domain, does it? That's my first question.
I think we have legal counsel joining us. Terry, maybe you can weigh in on that.
I believe we do, but I will check. I believe we do, but I will check. I'm going to check our little JPA agreement. Thank you.
But it would certainly be if it was in the county would have it. If it was in either of the water districts, they would have it. So if it was, overlaid by another agency, I think that would be covered one way or the other.
Well, hopefully we won't have to go there.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Whether or not you adopted that right, if you will, within your bylaws, your current JPA, the statute affords you as a public agency you have the statutory ability to invoke eminent domain.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Dave.
Yeah. So a different question has to do with when currently the readings from monitoring and the ones that would happen with these new wells, Is our plan to, is that public information? Is it something easily provided and posted for the public to read those? Or do we need to work with the data over time and then publish it periodically?
It legally would be public information. It'll be stored in the data management system, which again, anybody could do a Public Records Act request if necessary. However, it's our hope to have some aspect of that to be public through a portal, and then also anything related to our SMCs, any of our representative monitoring points, they'll all be part of our annual reports, and so that will also be public information.
Great. Yeah, I'd like the idea of a portal or posting on the web somehow of what that information is. Thank you.
Yeah, there is actually already a portal, that's the Sigma portal, and all of this information, not only the representative monitoring points, but all of them are available. Anyone can go and have a look at that data. And once it's uploaded, this basin doesn't have it. Once the GSP is submitted, then all the data will be submitted also to that portal, and anyone can go and take a look and see a chart and do that kind of thing. So that's probably the most immediate place to look for it.
Great, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, is there any questions from someone or anyone from the public?
Those people in attendance, if you wish to speak, either raise your hand on computer or press a *9 on the phones. I do not see any takers.
Okay, so do I have a motion on recommendation to approve authorized staff to execute the contract in the amount of $199,970 with Montgomery and Associates for monitoring network enhancement? Do I hear a motion? Jack's got his hand up.
I move to approve and authorize the staff to execute the contract, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. A second.
I will second.
Okay.
Who was the second? I'm sorry.
That was Dale.
That was Dale.
Okay. Okay. Ready for roll call vote?
Roll call vote, please.
Okay. Ankfer,
Aye.
Koenig,
Aye.
McPherson,
Aye.
Cassidy,
Aye.
Koopman,
Aye.
Pollock,
Aye.
Dillis,
Aye.
Mayhood,
Aye.
Smalley,
Aye.
Stiles,
Aye.
and Perry.
Aye.
Passes unanimously.
Okay. So that takes us to 2.3, our informational session. I'm going to turn it over to Dave and Georgina, I think, at this point.
Yep, it's, I believe, them. And Georgina, I'm going to, again, stop sharing here so you can grab and set up your next set of slides.
Oh, I think it's going to be, it's going to be
The roadmap first?
Sierra.
Oh, Sierra first, okay.
I'm gonna go straight into that. So I'm gonna stay out of the way, and we're gonna go straight to Sierra and then the two guest presenters tonight.
And can you make me, do I
You
have to-
should be able to, yep.
All right, and you're gonna need to be able to pivot quickly because the other presenters are going to also jump on here and share their screens when it's their turns. Okay.
I see we have a raise hand from legal counsel. Terry, is that something
I just wanted to answer Jack's question. At 4.21, the agency has the power of eminent domain in support of what Dave just said. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Terry.
Okay. Dave, are you teeing me off or am I just going?
And I think he handed it over to you. It's
Okay,
all you.
I'll just
Yep.
go. All right.
Yep.
Yeah, it's all you, Sarah. There's nothing that I need to say. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Great. So hi, everybody. We are very lucky tonight. We're actually getting some guest speakers, which we haven't had in a while. You're probably very used to hearing myself and Georgina and Perrette and a number of us talk, but you're going to get to hear some other voices this evening. So I hope that'll be a fun treat and change of pace. What I wanted to do today is just set up a little bit of preparing you for kind of what's happening in the next step before you get your final opportunities to review all of the draft sections of the GSP. Because I think that it's really important to understand kind of the perspectives of how this GSP gets reviewed by other people other than those within our agency and the Department of Water Resources. Um, and to have that information just kind of sitting in the back of your mind as you're reviewing the sections that we wrote, in case it might help you understand why some of the sections are so detailed, why there's some information in there that maybe you wouldn't have thought necessary. But it's got a lot to do with the idea that, well, we've spent a lot of time when we've talked to you about the requirements under SGMA and what the Department of Water Resources is looking at when they are evaluating these sections. And we've really kind of focused our talks about that, while only kind of alluding to the fact that there will also be opportunities for other entities, individuals and organizations to have an opportunity to make comments. And along those same lines, to make sure that you're aware that there have been ongoing conversations between staff and other organizations and entities throughout the entire GSP development process. And the most obvious link to that is the Surface Water Technical Advisory Group. But these conversations are kind of ongoing, both as our work with SGMA and just conferences and presentations, and just keeping our finger on the pulse of what is happening statewide in other basins around the state. So I'm hoping that by hearing these other people, you'll really get a sense of understanding the benefits of all of the work that our agency has invested in communicating with other organizations and entities, and then give you a sense of what people will be looking for. So there's going to be two opportunities for organizations and entities outside of our agency and outside of DWR to comment. The first one is going to be after our draft plan is released at the end of July. We will be holding a 60-day comment period, and that period is open to the general public, but it's also going to be other regulatory agencies might take this opportunity to make comments to us. It might be nonprofit or advocacy groups or disadvantaged community or environmental justice organizations will also use this 60-day comment period to let us know what they think of our plan. And in some basins, this will be the first opportunity that these groups have had to have their voices heard. And I hope that that is not the case here. We have really been trying to do a lot more engagement. The hope is that we have already anticipated any sort of substantive positive comments that would really help us enhance the GSP. But during this comment period, they will have the opportunity to give us feedback, and then we will have the opportunity to decide whether that is feedback that we want to incorporate into our GSP. And then after we submit the plan in January, DWR will hold a 75-day comment period. And so at that time, the comments are no longer coming to our agency. The comments are going to DWR. And they are meant to help DWR in their evaluation to decide whether we have met the criteria set out under SGMA and make recommendations about if and how they approve our plan. We are able to respond to those comments in the form of letters, but we are not at that point going to be able to make any changes to the GSP. It will have already been submitted. And so we certainly don't want that to be the time that we find that we somehow overlooked something somewhat critical in our plan. So the idea is that we are preparing for that by doing a lot of work on the front end to make sure that that's not the case. So tonight we have two speakers who are both going to take just about 10 minutes to talk a little bit about their organizations and how they have been approaching commenting on other GSPs. The reason that I chose that we've reached out to these two individuals is because they are both already, they've both been involved in agencies that have been doing a lot of work related to SGMA throughout the state. And these two individuals are both members of our surface water technical advisory group. So they have been more involved in this basin. They have a better sense of our goals here in locally, and know the intentions that we had behind our decisions. So the first is Melissa Road, whose name I think I spelled incorrectly. I apologize, from the Nature Conservancy. TNC is, they are a nonprofit organization, and they have been offering a wider range of tools. Melissa may speak to some of them later, many of which are included in our GSP as part of our monitoring plan. And they do make comments. They made a number of comments on the plans that were submitted in 2020. And then Jessie Maxfield is coming from a slightly different perspective. She's with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, which is a regulatory agency, and also a member of the technical advisory group, and has a slightly different view. And so I'm hoping that after you have heard these presentations and you kind of take the time to think about them, and then you are reading through the sections kind of for the last time, I hope that you'll see that the GSP is better for taking this into account and more likely to receive DWR approval when it is submitted. And so with that, I am going to I think is actually going to ask Melissa to share her screen first and give the first presentation.
And Melissa, you should be able to do that. Give it a try, please.
And I would request that we save questions for the end. So rather than at the end of each presentation, I think it would be better to do it a little bit more like a panel where we save the questions for both Melissa and Jessie to answer afterwards.
Great. Thank you. Can you all see my screen and hear my voice all right? Okay, fantastic. Thanks for the introduction, Sierra. I appreciate being here and to be able to talk to you all. I'm a groundwater scientist with the Nature Conservancy. I've been there for about 5.5 years and was hired on at the beginning of SMGWA, and was given the task of figuring out how much groundwater does nature need, and how do we make sure that ecosystems are getting considered adequately in these plans. So for those of you who aren't aware of or know of the Nature Conservancy, we're a global organization that works in 72 different countries, all 50 states, and we're a science-based organization. And our mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. So it has a very, planet and people focus. We have two main strategies for achieving conservation wins. And the first is developing science and data and tools to help advance policy and protection. And then the second, which is quite different from a lot of other environmental NGOs, is that we purchase land and we protect it. And in California, for instance, we have 500 million acres that we own and operate, and some of it is working lands that will eventually be converted to protected lands. So I'm going to show you, I can advance my slide. Oh. All right, so here's some drone footage of a property of ours in the Santa Clara River, along the Santa Clara River at the height of the drought. It's a riparian area in Ventura County, and you can see that it's been hit pretty hard from the drought. This used to be mostly cottonwoods and willows, and there's about 500 acres of it that just catastrophically all just died off very quickly during the drought. And so this is definitely one definition of an adverse impact due to groundwater depletion. There are other forms of it that don't look as severe, whereas like you would have lack of recruitment and succession processes happening that can result in forests looking more like parks, and you don't have the younger plants to be able to come in and replace the mature trees when they die. So there are multiple ways that groundwater can impact riparian ecosystems, and not only for the trees, but also for the aquatic organisms living within the interconnected surface waters. So, so the reason why this is a problem is that it's not only just happening on our property. It's over the past century, we've had 95% of wetland and river habitat gone for various reasons, but mostly due to land use conversion and groundwater use. And so ultimately, the 5% that are remaining really have become like the last refugia for these organisms, the species that live there. These groundwater dependent ecosystems are biological hotspots, and California, when you compare it globally, we are a global biodiversity hotspot, and with more species in California than Canada and the rest of the United States combined. So we have a really large array of species, but a lot of them are on the brink of extinction. They have threatened or endangered species status, and there's quite a few that are directly and indirectly reliant on groundwater. So luckily in 2014, SMGWA passed. The Nature Conservancy has been involved in helping shape it, and also and a large part of that was due to the fact that we had some science done mapping groundwater dependent ecosystems in California. And so that was an effort that had been done by my colleagues Matt Merrifield and Jeanette Howard. And so once the law had passed, we worked directly with the Department of Fish and Wildlife and also with Department of Water Resources to develop a more refined version of this groundwater dependent ecosystem map, which you all have used. It's called the NC data set. So other things that we're doing in order to support, now that we're in the implementation phase of SMGWA, is that we recognize that this is the first time that California water agencies have had to consider impacts to ecosystems. And in fact, California is, SMGWA is 1 out of 4 laws internationally that actually requires agencies or groundwater sustainability planning to consider impacts to ecosystems. So we're at the forefront of this space. And so there's a lot of knowledge gaps. And so a lot of the work I've been doing is trying to work with academics and other researchers to help fill these gaps, because this is not really feasible to be done. That kind of research it's very difficult to do at the within GSA at the GSA level. So we're trying to find out as much as we can about what groundwater levels these ecosystems need, how they function, and what are the water requirements, so that we can get this information out to the GSAs to make your jobs easier. We have tools with satellite that we've developed from satellite imagery, and all of this can be found on our groundwater resource hub. So there's multiple ways for TNC and other stakeholders to engage. So on the right is a table from a guidance document on stakeholder involvement that DWR put up. And because we work at the statewide level, it's been, we haven't been able to go into the nitty gritty of all the GSA meetings and get involved at a really in detail level. And so strategically, we've been trying to position ourselves in a way so that we can be helpful and provide technical support and feedback in the most concise and efficient way. And so we've done this through workshops, working groups like your surface water working group. And then also a large part of that is writing public comment letters. So that's one way that we review the plans, and then we provide technical feedback and support, and let you know what we think about it. So that's one way that we've tried to efficiently be able to review all the plans and provide assistance. So as Sarah mentioned, in 2020, we reviewed all the 2020 GSPs, and there was some key takeaways from that. We found a lot of the groundwater dependent ecosystems weren't properly mapped. And the reason for this was a lot of agencies were using depth to groundwater incorrectly. They were essentially using groundwater levels from one point in time and not taking into consideration that there's fluctuations in groundwater levels. The second is that interconnected surface waters were also improperly mapped. A lot of folks, when they saw intermittent streams, they would just say that they were disconnected, but they're really connected but losing systems. Third, the sustainable management criteria did not consider potential impacts to environmental beneficial users. And so really what we just got a lot of was like, you know, not great maps of where they are, these ecosystems are, and then no consideration whatsoever of potential impacts. And then fourth was that environmental stakeholder comments on the draft GSPs remained unaddressed in the final GSP. So we have provided very thorough feedback, and very few GSAs were able to address those. And we do recognize that there was a short turnaround, and this is part of the issue with being in the consulting phase of the role with the SIGMA process, because the public comment period is it's too short in order to really integrate the feedback from the stakeholders. And that's why it's good to like have these like working groups and whatnot, so you can get the feedback earlier. And then the fifth was that shallow aquifers were poorly monitored with no plans to reconcile monitoring gaps. It was we see this as a really big issue because we can't ensure that groundwater is not having an adverse impact on ecosystems, on shallow domestic wells and streams if we're not monitoring them. So, and I just wanted to, a couple slides back, mention that, you know, with SIGMA, the stakeholder involvement is really key, because when you look at what sustainability means, like what the origins of it, it's meant to balance economic issues, environmental issues, and social issues. And, you know, disadvantaged communities, tribes, and the environment are 2 out of the 3 main pillars of sustainability, right? And so if we're not incorporating stakeholder feedback and interest and seriously considering impacts to these users, we're not achieving sustainability in this broad sense. So we have a few recommendations. One, we want to make sure that the best available science is being used, and that, you know, that the GSAs are showing their work. It was really frustrating to read plans with like no full explanations of the thought process or why certain things were omitted and whatnot. And I think we all recognize that, you know, SIGMA is about adaptive management. There's going to be a lot of things we don't know, but that's fine. Just write about it, explain what you don't know, what are the uncertainties, and how you're going to reconcile those data gaps. And then, you know, you don't have to reconcile all of them, but you prioritize. You go through the thought process of how you prioritize the reconciliation. Yeah, and when data gaps do exist, be conservative. So a lot of times we saw that folks didn't have shallow monitoring wells around interconnected surface water or around streams, and they just said, we don't have an interconnected surface water. It's like, no, you don't have data to show that you have an interconnected. You don't just take it out. And so, you know, my new mantra has been that the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. You need to show, if you don't have the data to support that that's not an interconnected surface water, then that should stay in the plan as a potential interconnected surface water until you have information to pull it out in future GSPs. Yeah, prioritize stakeholder engagement with all beneficial user types. And then partner with academics. And you all are, you know, I live in Santa Cruz too. We have UCSC here. You know, they're always looking to be able to make their research more meaningful, and it's a nice partnership. I've seen it in some other basins where they partner with academics, and they can have the academics go into the nitty-gritty and understanding the more of the details that maybe you can't do in your monitoring networks. And same with federal resource agencies. They have a lot of monitoring going on. And then the last is to reconcile data gaps, because Sigma is based on adaptive management, and you can't adaptively manage if you don't get more information. So that's it. Thank you for having me. And I think, I don't know how much time we have for questions, but Sarah, I'll let you.
Yeah, I think maybe what we should do is have Jessie go ahead and give her presentation, and then we'll kind of assess how much time we have at the end of
Sure.
that. So if you could.
I'm also happy to answer questions in the chat afterwards if we don't have time.
Thank you.
Am I sharing my screen?
You are.
Woo! Okay, look at me go. This is the first time I've presented on Zoom in a while, so I wasn't sure how smooth the transition would be, so this is good. All right, so first and foremost, thank you so much for inviting me to come present today. I'm Jessie Maxfield. I'm the relatively new Water Rights Coordinator for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife Bay Delta region. And part of this role includes being part of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act coordinators around the state. So I represent my region in that group. Today, I'm going to be going over the department's role in SGMA, as well as how we participate in the review of groundwater sustainability plans. I'm also going to provide a brief overview of the department's key concerns with regards to fish and wildlife that we take into consideration when we're reviewing and commenting on GSPs. And then finally, I'll share with you some of the things that we've come across during our review of other GSPs and that have caused some concern for us, and provide some general GSP recommendations based on those findings. So CDFW's role in all this. To put it simply, our goal is that GSPs are developed and implemented to avoid adverse impacts to fish and wildlife beneficial users of groundwater. We are a trustee for the state's fish and wildlife resources, and the department has jurisdiction over the conservation, protection, and management of fish, wildlife, native plants, and the habitats necessary for biologically sustainable populations of these species. Many sensitive ecosystems and public trust resources depend on groundwater and interconnected surface waters. Staff are spread pretty thin these days. I know I've been very busy with drought response, but as much as possible, we engage as a stakeholder in the groundwater planning processes, where we serve as representatives for the groundwater needs of groundwater dependent ecosystems and fish and wildlife beneficial uses and users of groundwater. After the passing of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, the department developed a document for groundwater sustainability agencies titled Fish and Wildlife Planning Considerations. This document highlighted our recommended planning considerations for all groundwater managers. These recommendations are complementary to the SGMA statutes and regulations. The recommendations are broken into 3 different categories. There's scientific considerations, management considerations, and legal, regulatory, and policy considerations. Our hope is that this document is used by groundwater sustainability agencies during their plan development in order to ensure that the department's fish and wildlife concerns are addressed in the GSP. For scientific considerations, the department expects groundwater plans and supporting documentation to follow best available science practices. Application of these scientific concepts can improve the likelihood that a groundwater plan will avoid impacts to fish and wildlife. I'll highlight the things that we're looking for in the plans when it comes to scientific considerations. If hydrologic connectivity exists between surface and groundwater, that ecosystem is a potential groundwater dependent ecosystem and must be identified in the GSP. Hydrologic connectivity between surface and groundwater, as well as groundwater accessibility to terrestrial vegetation, should be evaluated carefully, and the conclusion should be well supported. Interconnected surface water depletion attributable to groundwater extraction can occur through 2 different mechanisms. There's captured recharge, when water is intercepted from traveling down gradient and discharging into surface waters, and induced infiltration, where extraction creates the cone of depression where gaining reach now is a losing reach. I'll talk a bit more about what is expected regarding interconnected surface waters in the next slide. A range of species, both plant and animal, and their life history should all be considered. A variety of habitat characteristics, including impacts to habitat connectivity, heterogeneity, and sensitivity to groundwater, should all have been contemplated in the plan development process. Effective monitoring is important to understanding groundwater management impacts to GDEs. We're looking for robust monitoring systems that are capable of identifying early signs of adverse impacts, as well as informing baselines and characterizing interconnected surface waters. This is an area that we have seen lacking in other GSPs. The plan should include adequate scientific justification for representative site selection. For example, the site reflects general conditions in the area. In terms of data quality, transparent GSPs will clearly identify data used to develop the plans and include narratives on data collection methods, equipment calibration, quality assurance checks, data processing steps, and perhaps most importantly, how the data was used to inform the plan components. The department strongly encourages groundwater planners to detail how management actions will consider fish and wildlife beneficial uses and users of groundwater, and what management actions will be initiated and on what timeline, if any adverse impacts are observed. So for some management considerations, we know, as we've talked about, Melissa included in her presentation, that information gaps are common to groundwater management. So the department recommends erring on the side of caution when it comes to protecting fish and wildlife. Adaptive management should also be incorporated into GSPs, as was discussed earlier. As more information becomes available, there needs to be flexibility on the part of groundwater managers so that plans can be adapted to changing resource conditions. Again, this is where the importance of monitoring data quality and quantity comes into play. Without that data, there's nothing to inform the adaptive management process. Groundwater planners may want to prioritize where monitoring and management resources are allocated, for example, to areas that are considered to have higher habitat value or vulnerability. And the department also looks for multi-benefit approaches to management. We support projects and management actions that serve multiple beneficial users of groundwater. An example of this might be a recharge project that contributes both to aquifers and in-stream flow. So moving on to the legal, regulatory, and policy considerations. Apart from SMGWA, there are numerous laws, regulations, and policies that protect species and habitat and should inform development and implementation of GSPs. These include, but are not limited to, these include, but are not limited to the long list I have here on the slide, and due to the time limitations, I'm not going to go over all of them individually, but these should all be considered during the development and implementation of your GSPs. SMGWA requires that groundwater-dependent ecosystems and interconnected surface waters be identified in groundwater sustainability plans, and the following are key questions that we consider related to GDEs when we're reviewing GSPs.
Excuse me, somebody needs to mute. Think about it if it's you. Okay, sorry.
Thank you. Okay, so SMGWA requires that groundwater-dependent ecosystems and interconnected surface waters be identified in GSPs, and these are kind of the following key questions that we consider when we're reviewing GSPs related to these. Does the GSP adequately identify groundwater-dependent ecosystems and address their protection? How did the GSP determine if GDEs are being adversely impacted by groundwater management? And if they are being adversely impacted, does the plan include appropriate and timely monitoring and management response actions? For interconnected surface waters, we're looking for clear identification of interconnected surface water systems and an estimate of the quantity and timing of depletions of those systems. So the questions that we would ask ourselves when we're reviewing the GSP is, does the GSP document the timing, quantity, and location of interconnected surface water depletions attributable to groundwater extraction? How does the GSP address the determination of whether these depletions will impact fish and wildlife? And if any adverse impacts are observed, does the GSP include timely monitoring and management response actions again? I thought it might be helpful to bring up a few of the issues that we've seen with other plans we've reviewed. The first one is, I think, already been mentioned by Melissa, is the use of groundwater elevation as a proxy for stream flow depletion. A relationship between groundwater elevations and stream flow depletion must first be shown to exist in order to use groundwater levels as a proxy. Other GSAs have been wanting to use groundwater elevation without first establishing this relationship. Another issue is that some GSAs are choosing to interpret the time when the act was signed as the baseline. Stream flow depletion was already an issue at this time because it was the fourth year of a historic drought. In 2015, stream flow depletion was severely depleted due to years of drought, and using the 2015 conditions as a target is not protective of fish and wildlife and will likely result in a lack of suitable flows and habitat to support steelhead and other species. And another area where we have seen plans lacking is a lack of monitoring. In most cases, we know there's not a lot of groundwater data available to inform GSP development, and we often feel that the plans don't include enough additional sufficient monitoring to address the existing data gaps. So these are my takeaway messages. Again, we know that everybody's struggling with a lack of available data. So our recommendation is that in the absence of data, that GSA should take a more conservative approach with their planning efforts. We also feel that if you do not have the data, that you should make a firm commitment to collecting the additional data needed and use that to inform the adaptive management process. And again, baselines or targets should be determined by adequate habitat conditions, but not using a point in time, such as 2015. So in conclusion, I just want to reiterate that the department participates in this process because we care about groundwater management. Groundwater is a critical component of functional ecosystems, and it is within the department's jurisdiction to conserve, protect, and manage fish, wildlife, native plants, and the habitats they depend on. We appreciate the opportunity to engage as stakeholders in your process and all of your efforts to include us, and thank you again.
All right, thank you very much, Jesse and Melissa. This is Dave Sepos, and I'm going to go ahead and take over here on facilitation. So what I would like to do now, as was discussed a bit earlier, but to put some structure on some things so we're staying in our structured manner as a board meeting. Let's start first with Melissa's presentation and go ahead and try to field questions there. We'll do that, then we'll go ahead and move on to any public questions, and that will include questions or comments from respective member agency staff. Then we'll transition to Jessica's presentation and do the same structure. Bruce, you have your hand up. It went up during Jessica's presentation. Is your question for Jessica? And if so, I'm going to ask you, we'll sit on that, and then I'll come back to you in a little bit. If instead it's for Melissa, I'll come to you first.
Well, it is for Melissa. It could be for both of them, I guess, but Melissa, it came to mind. First of all, thank you both for those excellent presentations, concerning ones. Amazed that you operate 500 million acres in California, but that 95% of the wetland and river habitat has been lost. Over how many years? I mean, I don't know how far that goes back, 1900 or whatever, but it was nice to see, I think Miles Ryder of Driscoll's in that photo with Governor Brown too, but you know, we're not interconnected with any federal or state water sources of any magnitude. And you know, what's our best chance of maintaining our water sources? You see overall, I mean, I guess it's conservation, you know, recharge and maybe interconnection, but is that probably the breadth of what we can hope for, or what we should go after, what we should be focused on? I think we are, but just to get a general observation of what we should be doing, or what are our chances of really maintaining at least what we have?
Yeah, there's a lot of different types of projects and management actions that can be taken. You know, they can, I think in terms of, that's why it's really important to understand, to map the ecosystems well, know where they're the most, which ones are at the most risk within your basin and whatnot. But there's a whole suite of demand management tools that can be used, which I know is not really in favor in many GSAs, but not in not just like widespread demand management, but you could also be more targeted in terms of like having setbacks around streams and or vulnerable habitats. And so that's a really great way to be able to manage conditions, you know, immediately around these ecosystems. And in the you know, the GSP regulations, there was, you know, there's proposal of management areas. And so I've often proposed, you know, said this would be a great thing to put GDEs, especially if you have like a large acreage of them in one contiguous areas. You kind of establish a management area for those for that ecosystem area, so you can set pumping rules or setbacks or density rules for wells in those areas. And then I know SGMA doesn't, you know, the GSAs, you know, don't necessarily have to do this, but you know, another thing to consider is that, rural domestic wells I know they're de minimis users, and everyone needs a right to water and everything, but I think there's some things that can be done at the county level in terms of permitting, to make sure that new wells aren't going to like cause an adverse impact, because we've done some modeling in for instance up in Mendocino, and we found that it's basically like death by 1,000 cuts. We were looking to see if cannabis cultivation from Mendocino was causing stream flow to decrease because of increased groundwater pumping. But then what we found is actually the rural domestic wells that happen to be like right along the streams, they're not taking up groundwater, they're taking up surface water, because they're so tapped into that that interconnected surface water system. So that's one area. But then there's also types of projects you can do with strategically putting managed aquifer recharge projects. You could do like stream bank recharge and whatnot. But Georgina will be the one. She's good with this kind of stuff, but because she knows your basin in such detail. But another thing that's overlooked aside from demand management is land management. And so, how agricultural land is being managed, how public lands are being managed. There are ways to that is like also an area that's not really looked into that much. So I want to get creative.
All right, well, thank you for the question, Bruce, and for the comprehensive response, Melissa. Let me move on to Ruth, please.
Yeah, I've got a question for each of the panelists, and we can start with Melissa, which is, do you have any specifics you would like to let the board know about, things that you are concerned about in our proto GSP?
Well, I haven't read the most recent draft, so I'll be providing my thorough feedback. But I do think that, if there aren't sufficient monitoring wells throughout the basin, that's a problem. And so I think it's good to make sure that you're reconciling those data gaps so that you are, doing what Sigma is asking, which is adaptive management. So yeah, I think, I'm gonna, I don't know if I mentioned this in my presentation though, but we're gonna be reviewing all of the 2022 GSPs in draft form. And so, and I'm working with a coalition of other NGOs that are representing other interest groups like disadvantaged communities and tribes, and also climate change. And so we have a whole checklist that we're going to be going through and reviewing all the plans in detail and providing public comment letters, not just to you, but all the other 63 other GSPs that are going to be coming out, which will be fun times. But we're hoping that feedback can be, we want to provide the very thorough feedback in the draft stage so that you all do have the opportunity to, try to address it, or at least acknowledge it and say like, hey, we can't get to it this time, but there's 2026 or whatnot.
And
27.
Ruth, you wanted to hear Jesse's thoughts on the same question, correct?
Yeah, I think Melissa answered it very well there, but I think I would add that the monitoring wells issue, I think, was one that came up during our technical work group discussion. And I have to admit, I go to a lot of groundwater meetings, so sometimes it's hard for me to remember which specific comments we had at which one of those meetings. But I will say that I was relieved to hear Georgina's presentation earlier about how they're putting in some of those additional wells. And I think, that may be in response to some of the feedback that was given during some of those technical work group calls. So it sounds like there's been steps to address that issue, which is good. And then I didn't get a chance to respond to the other question about, things that people can do and things that we're looking to in terms of solutions. And I was just going to add that the near stream wells issue is one that we've looked into, and we've developed some outreach materials because we have found that extraction from near stream wells for domestic or cannabis and some of the other areas in our region has really had an impact on stream flow. And so we're trying to encourage folks to, not all be pumping at the same time, and to the extent possible, extract groundwater during the winter months and put it in storage to use during the summer so that there's less extraction happening during the summer months. So we're trying to really work with other organizations like the RCDs and Trout Unlimited to get folks into programs where they can store groundwater that they pump during the winter months rather than using it during the summer.
Excellent, thank you. Dale, let's go to you, please. And you, there you go, thank you.
Hi, thanks, Dave. Yeah, thank you for that. That was a really good presentation. I'm more of a proactive than reactive, and I think that falls right into this realm. So thanks for that. I just want to kind of reorient myself, though, in these particular areas. Is our role as an agency here more of a do no harm, as far as, you know, what's going on now and kind of out of our control? But I know, you know, as far as our management and our project and management actions, you know, we would be looking at these things. But in that general sense, is that kind of where our role is? Maybe this is more of a question for Georgina.
Georgina, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm actually interested to hear the response from maybe Jesse on that. So, you know, some of the indicators are a do no harm, like the groundwater quality one is in implementing the GSP, you should not be degrading groundwater quality. I think what Dale's asking here is that in implementing the GSP, you should not make things worse with respect to the environmental uses of groundwater. So yeah, I mean, I have an idea what the answer is, but I'm interested to hear their perspective. I think you hear enough from me all the time, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally we want to see conditions improve, you know, throughout the basin. And, you know, that I understand. I was part of a call recently where somebody was talking about, you know, kind of the burden of raising, you know, groundwater levels or improving conditions, and then now having to be protective of those improved conditions. And, you know, I feel like that's sort of the goal. But, you know, that's kind of, that would be my perspective on it, is that we want conditions to improve. We want to have the opportunity for resource recovery in some of these streams where, you know, where we need improvements in stream flow. And so, you know, our business is not managing species into extinction. You know, we're trying to recover populations. And so I think that we would like to see improvements to the extent that that's possible.
Melissa, let me check in with you, see if there's any subsequent response that you have to Dale's question. I need to point out and sort of check in on our time frame. So let's go ahead and hear if there's anything that I need to check back in with board members to see if there's any further questions, transition over to some public feedback and comment if there is any, and then continue us on with the rest of tonight's agenda. And just as a note to something that Jessica had said, I think it was Jessica much earlier, that, or maybe it had been Melissa, actually, I think about it, it is completely appropriate to go ahead and enter questions into chat. Be aware that because of this being a Brown Act meeting, I'll need to read those into the record anyhow to ensure equity, that people are aware of what a question is, whether it's put in chat or not. Anyway, with that said, Melissa, let me come back to you to see if you have any further response to Dale's question.
Yeah, just really quick, Jesse's answer was really good. Like we said, like I said in my presentation, like a lot of these species are not in the best condition, and to the extent that we can improve conditions, it would be good. Another thing, I think there's just a lot. It's all about risk management, right? So being conservative. If I was a GSA, I would want to be conservative, because you want to reduce your risk to litigation, right? Like, because if you are assuming that you're not impacting an ecosystem or causing harm, but then you actually are, like, you might open yourself to litigation. So it's important to make sure that you're showing your work and making sure that you're in trying to be as conservative and careful as possible, because when these species are extinct, they're gone, right? You can't recover that. So yeah.
All right. Any further questions or comments from board members at this time? Hearing none and seeing none, what I'd like to do now is let me go ahead and go to member agency staff members. Are there any questions or comments that you would like to pose? If so, please use the raise hand mode ideally. All right, hearing none and seeing none, what I'd like to do now is we will open up the floor for any public members and comments. As Perrette had mentioned earlier, if you are a member of the public and you have called in, you can use *9 and press *9 to get into the queue. Perrette, we can go ahead and open up the phones now if anybody's muted. All right, hearing none and seeing none. I'm going to now transition us. And again, thank you. One more round of thanks to Melissa and to Jesse. I believe they probably are going to, at some point here, move on to have actual lives this evening and not be with us through 8:30 or 9 o'clock, although admittedly you will be missing gripping Sigma-related discussion, as I know you would. But that said, if there are subsequent questions that folks have, yes, please do use the chat. I'll read it into the record. We'll extract it and we'll get those questions sent off to Jesse and to Melissa, and we can get responses back as a part of the long-range public record. So again, one more thanks to Melissa and Jesse for great effort. With that, we're going to hand it over to Jennifer from Miller Maxwell, and we're going to have a discussion about the communications and engagement plan.
Jennifer, go ahead and share your screen, please.
Okay, here we go.
Yep, we can see it now.
You can see it. Awesome. Yep. Okay. Oops. Jumping ahead. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jennifer Murray. I'm with Miller Maxfield. We've been working with the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency since its inception, and for the last approximately 3 years, we've been working on the communications and engagement plan. As you all know, SMGWA requires GSPs to have a C&E plan. Today, we're going to present that draft plan. You first reviewed this plan last summer. I believe it was in July. And so this is just an update. It's also in your board packet. And one thing I want to preface all this with is the C&E plan is an iterative document. It looks both forwards and backwards. It's something that we're constantly updating and working on because it's both a plan and a project tracker, essentially. So it has some very clear purposes and objectives from the state. We want to assist the agency to deliver its communications. We want to engage the public in regards to the development of the GSP. And we also want to provide the board members and staff with a guide to ensure that we're consistently messaging about state requirements and following a roadmap for that GSP development. Now, you guys have actually seen the literal roadmap every meeting over the last several months, so you know that there is one, and we're on it, and we're nearing the end. It's getting exciting. Another essential part of this plan is to identify how and when beneficial users and other stakeholders can provide input to within the GSP process. So beyond just these board meetings, how we can connect with the public and beneficial users, stakeholders, agencies, disadvantaged communities. You know, there's a long list of people who have a stake in this process. So just in terms of logistics, the C&E plan that you have in your board packet tonight will be an appendix within the GSP. As I mentioned, this plan looks both forward and backwards. Our work's been done in phases with continual review and assessment. That review and assessment has happened in a couple of ways. We've presented to you in the past and had some conversations about process and goals and ideas on how to better engage with the public. We also meet monthly with the working group, and we assess lessons learned with different aspects of our outreach efforts and where we need to go next. So it's not just something we picked 3 years ago and decided to go down a path. Every month, every week, really, Bill and I from Miller Maxfield are looking at this and thinking about evaluations of it, and then working with a larger team to make those assessments and changes and pivot to ways that really work best for wherever we're at right now in the GSP process and where the public and the world is at. And so, as I said, this is an iterative process, and it's essential to that state process that we're all a big part of. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about what this plan is supposed to be. It supports the following goals. We need, like I've said, we need to educate stakeholders. We need, within the plan, as a sort of a baseline starting point, we wanted to articulate strategies and channels to obtain that input and really think about how we're going to increase awareness and understanding about the challenges that the agency faces and how this process works and what comes after the GSP rollout, really what happens over the next 20 years. And of course, the bottom line in all this is we want to increase engagement among stakeholders. So our agency has multiple audiences, and the plan has worked to reach those audiences in a variety of ways. Some of those examples, well, I'll go into some of those examples shortly. You guys have been a part of a lot of those examples. And before I dive into that, I just want to mention some of those key audiences. Obviously, the board and staff here tonight, the greater public, that includes customers within the San Lorenzo Valley Water District and Scotts Valley Water District. It's beneficial users in the city of Santa Cruz. It's private well owners. It's small water, other de minimis pumpers, disadvantaged communities. There's, it's a very long list. You'll see that all of that in the plan. It goes into much more detail in the plan. It also includes some specifics on the different strategies we deployed to each of those audiences. A lot of them are the same. You might see that, but there were some specified or some specifications for certain audiences versus others. And that's all detailed out in the plan. So some of our activities that we've taken on in the last 3 years, and this board has been a huge part of so many of these. Public informational sessions, we've held those, we've held workshops. And when I say we, I mean the agency. Workshops, the groundwater education series that happened a couple years ago in the winter. There were basin tours before pandemic. Obviously, board meetings are a great way to share a lot of really in-depth information with the public. The shift to virtual during pandemic and the introduction of board meeting summaries has been something we feel is essential because not everyone has the time or the brain power to sit through something like this. So we've been providing board meeting summaries over the last more than a year now to both San Lorenzo Valley and Scotts Valley Water Districts. And then those are also published or provided to local media and published sometimes. We can't control what media publishes, but we do try to keep reporters informed so that they can better cover this issue as they choose to. There's been media coverage. Kelly's done a great job with youth outreach, and the plan details a lot of her activities specifically. And co-promotional opportunities. That's fancy jargon just for saying that sometimes Scotts Valley or San Lorenzo Valley or the city of Santa Cruz shares information about SMGWA or Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency with their customers and their followers. Maybe it's on Nextdoor, maybe it's in a newsletter, but we have partner agencies that are willing to be that third-party validation and share information. So it reaches people again. We know that people need to hear things more than once to really engage and learn and participate. So we try to find multiple ways to connect with them. There's also been, obviously the website is a great way to just have information available when people choose to engage. There's a Facebook account that's been established for several years now that currently has 273 followers. That's about a third of what a local water agency might have. So it's not everyone, but we've worked really hard to try to sleuth out anyone who might have any interest in this process and get them connected. Within the last year, we started an Instagram account, and that's grown somewhat. I mean, it's less than Facebook so far, but it does continue to grow. And the MailChimp email newsletter, which goes out monthly with that board meeting summary and other information, has almost 350 subscribers. So during COVID, we also pivoted to reach the public in other ways, such as, like I mentioned, the board meeting summaries. We helped facilitate the private well owner meeting in an online format, including broadcasting it on Facebook Live last winter to try to just find new ways to reach people. And many of these strategies have happened throughout the process. Some have been part of that iteration and phasing that I talked about, and you can see all of that detail within the plan that's in your board packet. The plan has been and available on the SMGWA Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency website, and we continue to provide updated plans there for the public to review. Like I said at the beginning, this is an evolving document. We'll continue to refine it during the GSP review process. And the next phase, the next step in the plan is to support that GSP review to generate public engagement and feedback. Some ways we plan to work on that. We've been working with the working group. It's a lot of working all at once, sorry. We're updating the website. So before the GSP rolls out, there will be a new Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency website that's shiny and flashy and wonderful and just makes you want to click and comment, read the whole GSP, all 600 pages of it. We hope to roll that out just before your July board meeting, and that'll give us a little time to test drive it. Maybe we can get some volunteers from the board to poke around and let us know what works and doesn't work. So early July, we expect to have that out. And then we'll be able to upload the GSP to it and have some really dynamic ways for people to comment rather than sending an email to staff, that they can actually just comment maybe within the GSP itself, and that'll auto-generate back to us. And they can keep reading and add more comments. We're also working to plan a public event in early August, we think, but we're still refining that date, where we can talk about the GSP, answer questions, walk people through some of the key elements, and just hopefully reach a broader audience, maybe do something on a weekend when families could come instead of just evening meetings. And that could be something that is captured and also shared on the website or in another format in the future. So we really want to find ways to touch people now that there's an action item for them to comment and provide input. Obviously, they could have commented this whole time, but people love deadlines, and we're excited to see what we can do this summer to further engage with the public. And I think, that's my last slide. So that was a little faster than I meant to. I'm sorry, I hope I didn't talk too fast. And I can take any questions.
Okay, let's open the floor. Comments, questions, board members first. Okay, seeing none, there we go. Doug, go ahead, please.
Thought you were going to sneak away, huh?
No,
That,
and I know
Jennifer.
you have some questions, so I have some answers for you.
Cool. Yeah, I never want to catch anybody by surprise, but I do note in the document that was included in the packet, there's a long list of target audiences and stakeholders, and there's a lot of diversity there. And then when I look at the engagement and public outreach section, it's really, what I can see is fairly narrowly focused on groundwater users in the basin, which is a subset of all those target audiences. So, picking up the plan de novo, I'm left, well, how are we reaching out to these other folks? And so I'm wondering, is there more information available elsewhere that talks about how we touch all these other stakeholders, or is it more forthcoming, or am I just misunderstanding what's here?
No, we have some more appendixes to this appendix, if you will, that we're still working on, including the full list of all the media hits and press releases we've sent out in the past. So I know you were specifically wondering about the city and how we touch those folks. Media coverage obviously is one way. We all consume, the same couple of newspapers. Collaborative outreach, like I talked about, with partner agencies that are willing to share information in their publications and social media and websites. And then also just in board and staff representation, we do have representation from the city here who are aware of what's going on. And some, we all act as ambassadors for this agency and have some responsibility in engaging with our own constituency and bringing their comments or bringing them back to comment.
Yeah, and we report out at every water commission meeting, for example.
Yeah, we
but
appreciate that. Thank you.
I guess what I'm imagining is that in order to demonstrate that we've really done our good work on outreach here, that there be some sort of mapping between all these various tools and techniques and publications and so forth, mapping those to the target groups and trying to show where we have some indication of uptake, ideally. Is that a bridge too far, or is that something I can reasonably expect in the final document?
No, in other CME plans I've reviewed from other agencies, that's not a data point that I've seen. In Mid-County, for example, that's not something that I've seen articulated. But maybe Dave could speak to that.
I might be able to weigh on this a little bit, Jennifer, if you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Doug. So Jennifer's absolutely correct. I mean, the metric, if you will, and this is something that admittedly it's been quite some time since we had this presentation, but the metric is section 354.10 of the regs. We've talked about it in the past meetings that 354.10 absolutely creates a higher bar than is expected and common in things like CEQA and NEPA. However, it's not even as high a bar as what you said. What Miller Maxfield is doing in a very excellent way is compiling all the information, making sure that that information is going to answer the necessary questions for DWR to ask and check the boxes and then some, and essentially ensure that it's a very defensible record and this agency is above reproach and showing that it at a bare minimum and met the requirements of 354.10, which it has done and then some. That further mapping is probably not of merit necessarily, at least not yet. Perhaps in the future it would be. But for
it does sound really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other questions and comments from board members? All right, let me then open the floor and go to staff, agency staff. Any comments or questions you all would like to make? All right, hearing none, seeing none, we will then move on again to members of the public. If you are a member of the public, please go ahead and unmute your phone and Brett will assist in allowing you to do so. You can use *9 to get into the queue if you are via phone and not online.
We do have a member of public, Frank Cheap. Frank, you should be able to talk now. Let's try.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. You guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Good evening. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I've been on and off the call tonight. I've been on other business stuff. So definitely good work tonight. I guess as a member of the public, the only reason I know about Santa Margarita is stumbling into somebody at a bar literally 8 months ago. Apparently it was a previous board member. They weren't inebriated, if that helps by any stretch. But the format of the Zoom meeting is now changed, so you can't really see who's online. I see no way to see who's online. Previously, the format allowed me to see, certainly board member attendees, staff, and then other folks, assuming they were members of the public or governmental agencies. So right now, I have no idea if I'm the only member of the public attending, certainly making comments or not. The other thing is I do follow the Instagram account. I've done that for a while, and I'm one of 3 or 4 people that like comments. So I think from a social media standpoint, marketing is very difficult. I work for technology companies, and marketing is probably one of the hardest jobs, but it would seem that there would be, with so many thousands of users in San Lorenzo Water District, so many thousands of users in Scotts Valley, and who knows how many thousands of users in Santa Cruz, there would be a way to promote this agency for, truly stakeholders that are affected by future plans. So I'm more than willing to roll up my sleeves as a salesperson and help with ideas offline outside of this format to ways to encourage better public exposure, certainly participation. In the neighborhood I live in, there's 15 families here. I've promoted this several times. I will say part of it, when the public will dial into a call or call into a Zoom meeting of this nature, is, 4 hours of a lot of information, maybe too much for the average public person to absorb. But I would just say generally the hit rate is really, really low on something that will dramatically affect certainly people in the future. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank. Appreciate it. Keep your eyes peeled for the upcoming public events in the next couple of months, because we would absolutely like feedback on that, and hopefully we're going to be framing things in a way to really engage people, people's interests. Ruth, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, I'm hoping that the non-de minimis users are being repeatedly reached out to and directly contacted, because I imagine the boards of those small organizations will periodically change, but they may have to pay for some stuff. So I just want to make sure that they are getting contacted a lot.
Well, let me go to our current public or private pumper and de minimis folks who have been most actively involved. So Eden and Jeff, do you have anything you would like to say in that regard regarding networking activities that you've been doing? And then for that matter, Sierra, because I know that Sierra has also been playing a key role in helping to ensure networking is taking place from the county's perspective. So any staff or board members wish to respond to Ruth's question?
I would comment that I don't really know of any non-de minimis users. Those might be like Christmas tree farms or something that are using a lot of water. They're not in our neighborhood, so I'm not familiar with them.
Okay, let me go to Sierra and then I'll go to Chris.
In terms of outreach, Jeff is right there, and this is actually going to be the topic of the very next item that we're talking about, is the non-de minimis pumpers. There are only small water system, which we are in very regular contact with, and then 4 other known non-de minimis non-de minimis pumpers, which we'll talk about in the next section. But as recently as last month, I gave a presentation to a forum that the county holds quarterly for small water systems, and I spoke specifically about the groundwater sustainability agencies and what they could potentially mean for those small water systems, which are considered non-de minimis. So there are not many of them, which makes it fairly easy to do pretty targeted outreach to them.
That's wonderful. Speaking to them in person is great, or over Zoom.
Over Zoom.
Everything's over Zoom.
All right, thank you very much, Ruth. So let's see, seeing no other hands up from either board members or members of the public.
I had my hand up, I put it down. But
Chris, okay, you put your hand, okay, thank you. Chris, go ahead, please.
there was a list of them in a list of the non-de minimis users in the board packet. Small water systems, there was a list of them.
Okay, thank you, Chris. All right, so I'm going to go to Jennifer one last time. Jennifer, any closing comments before we move on to the next agenda item?
No, just thank you all for your time, and I'm sure we'll check in soon.
Excellent. All right, so with that, as Sierra just conveniently had a segue given to her, you owe Ruth a 20 for that seamless one. Go ahead.
Right. So this is a very brief presentation. As you can see, it's really only 2 slides. The topic of the conversation today is the idea of having this agency have a non-de minimis metering program. So that would be, as I very clearly state right here, only for wells serving more than 2 acre-feet per year. I'm going to give a little bit of fun, and then I'm going to say a little bit about why we're proposing this, and then we're going to go around the horn and hear from everybody on the board. So I just want to set you up before I start talking that you should definitely be paying attention, because I'm going to ask you a question. All right, so as background, as you know, SGMA does give the Groundwater Agency the authority, the powers and the authority to require that both well metering and reporting on all wells that pump more than 2 acre-feet a year. For reference, we are assuming that households in the basin, just an average private residence on a well, is using probably around 1/3 of an acre-foot a year. And so therefore, all of the private wells, the individual private wells, are going to be exempt from this because they're using the significantly less water than we would consider than 2 acre-feet a year. The small water systems in the basin are already metered per a county ordinance that passed in 2015. So I can't remember, there's something like 7 or 8 small water systems in this basin. They are already metered and they are already reporting their water use to the county. We estimate that there are probably 5 to 10 other pumpers. We know of 4. There's probably a few more. We haven't, if we start looking at aerials, we might come up with a couple more. But it's important to know this is very, very few pumpers that will be impacted by this, because the small water systems are already metered. So what we would like to propose is that we have an inclusion of a non-de minimis pumper metering program included in section 5 of the GSP. That will allow us, we don't need to have a lot of details right now. What we're basically proposing is that we put a little bit of information in the plan saying that we are going to develop this program and implement it and roll it out over the next 5 years. Probably sooner, but for the purposes of the GSP, we can deal with the details later. But because this is a hot button issue when we're talking about meters on anybody's well who has not previously been metered in any way, we wanted to bring it to the board to get your input on it. I don't expect it to be a very difficult program to implement, but it would be really the first time that the agency has taken an action of this kind. So what I'm looking for from the board today is concurrence on this recommendation that we include this non-de minimis metering program as part of the GSP now, because that will basically direct staff to start implementing this over the next few years. And then I'm happy to answer any questions, or certainly I'm looking for your input right now.
So as people are queuing themselves up with questions, which I suspect they will, perhaps to pre-answer something that might come up, Sierra, in your perspective, from a kind of a worst case scenario perspective or risk factor, what are the implications or risk, if at all, and hopefully not, to the GSA of putting something like this, which is basically a statement of intent, but not including any of the details, and as you say, the details would be worked out after GSP certification. So what are the implications and risks, if any?
I would say that the real risk would be us putting this in the plan and then not actually following through with it, because then we would be making a commitment and not keeping it. So by putting it in the plan, by going around and hearing from you and hearing and hopefully getting concurrence that you think that this is something that the agency would do, this is a really important step, we think, filling data gaps in terms of extractions within the basin. If we don't, if we put it in the plan and we don't do it, I think that that's a bad thing. I think it's not nearly as detrimental as the alternative, which is to not put this in the plan, which would make it harder to implement later, and also, you know, maintains data gaps that we know we have in terms of how much water is being extracted from the basin.
Okay, well, you answered the other question I was going to ask. So at that point, let's go on to our board members. We'll go to Mark first and then to Eden. Mark, go ahead.
Okay. Sarah, thanks for that quick summary. on the non-de minimis users. You said that you've had contacts with the handful, 5 or 6 in the basin. What has their feedback been on this potential metering? Has that been brought up to them?
We have not brought up the metering to this handful. If we were to include this in the plan, that would be a very good reason to reach out to them now and say that this is something that's going to be happening. But unless some other people have, I have not reached out to them about this specifically.
What has their feedback been in terms of receptiveness to this overall plan that we're developing for the basin? Are they?
The small water systems are very well aware of it, and they are generally in favor of things that help provide them with some degree of water supply security and just overall understanding of management. The additional handful of pumpers that we, for example, the quarry, we've reached out to them via notifications, but we haven't had a lot of dialogue with them.
Okay.
So,
all right. Thank you.
Let's go to Eden, and then we'll go on to Jeff.
Yeah, thanks. So I have one question and then a comment. So the question is, why do these 4 to 10 who haven't yet been publicly named for all of us, why do they matter so much?
Well, that question might be better directed to Georgina, but I can just start by saying that anybody extracting potentially large quantities of water represent a data gap in our groundwater modeling, because we are making estimates about how much water they are using, and those estimates could be wrong. If Georgina's listening, maybe she would like to add a little bit more.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, we're making estimates, and sometimes some of them, they're irrigators often, that's why they use that much water. And then they've I know of one that's been using recycled water, but they might be moving back off recycled water onto their well again. So we need to know all that type of information. But yeah, because also the reason is a lot of them are in the area where the biggest declines of groundwater levels have been as well. I mean, that's another sense of urgency about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the comment is, I mean, Sierra, you were asked for potential risks, and you cited putting it in the plan and then not following through. I would say there's some other pretty clear risks here. I mean, people who are depending on pumping a large amount of water, who are true non-de minimis extractors, depend on it for a reason. It's either financial or whatever. There's a clear risk there of litigation, exposing ourselves to litigation if we do it in not a proactive way. We don't reach out to those people before we put it in the plan, but they find out after it's already in the plan. And we've said publicly, our biggest risk is to not follow through and enforce it. And then they find out. That seems like an exposure to a whole different risk. So anyway.
So Eden, in that regard, is it accurate for me to construe, for us to construe then that we're, as you know, eventually as we go around the horn, as we call it, and I kind of call the question to everybody, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like what you're advocating is maybe you'd be comfortable with this, maybe not, but you absolutely want to know that before people see this in black and white, there's been another round of very direct outreach to these potential de minimis folks so that they're not caught off guard. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, for whatever reason, they've been, you know, a no-show for 2.5 years here, even though, you know, some attempts have been made to try to get them engaged. We haven't gotten any real engagement. It would have been sweet if we'd had one representative, you know, on the board or somebody speak at some of these meetings from that group, but it's just sort of an eyes wide open type of thing. I would think if we gave them a heads up first, and then they can make public comment or be engaged at the point in July onward, that's fine. But if we just go ahead and do it, then, you know, people are messed up and they will start planning their next step without interacting with us. And for a handful, it would be easy to try to head that off at the pass, I would think.
And Eden, I completely agree. We would reach out to them before, certainly before final adoption, but making sure that they have opportunity to provide comment on this. But I'm hesitant to go to people and say, hey, we're going to meter you, until I get direction from the board that there's appetite amongst the board to do that. So I think now is a good that's a really, really good point, that, and I should clarify that it would be my intention that we reach out to these folks right away so they have plenty of opportunity to comment. But again, I would like to hear from the board before I do that this is something that you're interested in.
My only other concern about this is that misinterpretation. I mean, you reached out to me, I appreciate it, Sierra, and said heads up is going to be on the thing. If any of your constituents ask what's going on, what's up with the metering or whatever, be prepared. It's non-de minimis extractors. Well, yeah, we all understand that. But if we put it in the plan, even after we've reached out to everyone, there's chance for misinterpretation when people word search the document or whatever else. So my concurrence would directly depend on us including some sort of accompanying clear statement, even if it's already elsewhere in the document, that reiterates that our GSP, as per Sigma, does not and will never regulate or meter de minimis extractors, so that the true de minimis extractors can find that near or proximate to this provision, and their worry or, you know, white sheet function is shut down immediately. That would be my interest. So.
All right, so as we're going to Jeff, who's next in the queue, Sierra, are you driving this PowerPoint right now, or is
yeah, all three slides of it? Yeah, that's me.
Okay, I'm going to offer a suggestion that on this screen, since this is going to be sort of the record of what the board will be weighing in on, perhaps add a bullet, if you can go into an editorial state and add something about, you know, in addition to details of the program we worked out, but something about direct and immediate outreach will be commenced or something like that to the de minimis users in advance of this getting included into the draft GSP, something like that. So that the points that Eden was making is a part of this question that we're asking the board to weigh in on. Jeff, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was curious. There's a slide somewhere that says who these pumpers are or what categories they fall into?
There's not a slide that says that, because I was a little hesitant to put the individual folks who.
I mean, out of all of the water that we're drawing out of the basin, what percentage would this be out of the couple thousand acre feet or whatever we're pulling from the basin? Is it a significant amount, do you think, or is it a negligible?
You know that?
Oh, you know, it's in section 2. There's a table of users, and it's a group of users that are like land use. It's like industrial and irrigation, large scale irrigation. Mm-hmm. And there's a category of that in a table in section 2 where it says how much each of the groups is using, and I can't remember what it is, but it's probably, it's probably of the order of 200 acre feet a year, I think. So I don't know if it was 300, but somewhere around there.
So a few of them are industrial and agricultural, and then maybe a few of them are a few homes that are chained together, something like that?
The small water systems are homes that are chained together to have enough of them to be considered non-de minimis would be a small water system, and they're already metered.
They're already, okay. All right, so it's all commercial. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sarah, I'm going to suggest that on that bullet you just added, maybe add direct and immediate outreach will be commenced to the known impacted pumpers prior to inclusion of this recommendation in the section 5 public draft version, something like that. So it's very clear that there's a sequential nature to this. Other members.
How about prior to the release of the public draft?
Yeah, something like that. Just so the sequence along the lines.
I imagine that we'll include the sentence or two that this will be as soon as we're done.
All right. Any other board members? Again, this is going to ultimately result in a board recommendation to staff, as we've done several times recently. So I really want to make sure we're exhausting questions and comments, and then I'm going to need to be going to the public first before I then double back around to you all and sort of, as we say, go around the horn. Jack, go ahead, please.
Yeah, concerning Eden's comment, in addition, he talked about, as I understood it, the fact that the de minimis users would not be metered now or ever. And I like the first part of that. I don't know, can we ever say never? Because, you know, things can get changed, right? The law changes, et cetera. But short of that, I think that'd be a reasonable thing just to make even though I'm sure it's in there already, just to be definitive about it, to be clear to folks that we're not talking about metering de minimis users.
Correct. The law does not give us the authority to meter de minimis users. So that is something that, the way I have this drafted in my mind, it's literally it's like the sentence right after we say that this is going to be happening, because as Ian pointed out, and I think it was a really good point, is if people just do a search of the document and they see metering, we want them to not have to search any further than that very same paragraph or couple of paragraphs to make it really clear that this program is focused on the non-de minimis pumpers.
Okay.
Let me add a bullet.
And you do have language related to this already in your guiding principles.
Yes.
The protective language already exists in the the agency's guiding principles. Let's go to Gail and then to Chris.
I guess I would just emphasize what Jack said about never say never. I mean, the law gives us the right to do it. And so I would just be cautious that however we word the GSP, that we don't make it sound like for the next 20 years, we would never do this. That's the only thing I would say, Sierra, is, you know, I understand the point of not making people search through, but I'd just be very cautious about how you word this, because that would really be a problem if you created as, I would rather that we just be silent about it personally, because I think that's such a booby trap. But if you really feel we need a statement, just be really cautious about how you word it.
Sigma does clearly say that we do not have the power the authority to meter the de minimis users. Trying to make sure I get it right every time I say this.
But am I wrong that the state would allow us if we wanted to?
I believe that is not allowed under Sigma.
Okay.
Right. The de minimis are protected. There are some misconceptions about what the de minimis language in Sigma does and does not afford protections on, but this is one of them that it does. It protects the de minimis from mandatory metering.
Metering and reporting of use.
Right. Okay. And I think it is also important, notwithstanding what Eden has said, just so that we make sure we're focused on what we need to focus on tonight. Let's all please remember, this is sort of a planning to plan statement. So we need to be careful both in tonight's conversation and in the language that gets included, that this is not tonight the wordsmithing of the details of how that program is going to work. It's just an intent to do so.
Yeah, this is not the program.
Right, right. Chris, go ahead, please.
And also, Sierra, you just mentioned that you already get the records from the small water system metering.
Yeah.
So then you would have a pretty good idea of what an individual on a private well does use, and that your third of an acre foot is based on, you know, some sort of data that you've got from those small systems, just as a very minor sampling, but at least, yeah, you know, gives you a good idea.
Yeah, the third of an acre foot estimate roughly comes from the small water systems as well as San Lorenzo Valley Water District usage in areas where it's kind of comparable.
Great, thanks.
Okay, any other questions or comments by board members at this time? Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and do the sequence of opening up to staff and then public. Parad, if you can go ahead and lower Chris's hand, that'd be helpful for me visually. Thank you. Let's go to staff. Are there any comments or questions from staff? Seeing none and hearing none, then I will go ahead. Let's open up the floor for the public. Again, as per the prior efforts, you can either use the raise hand mode to get to the queue or use a *9 if you're on a phone. And Paret can.
I see nobody in the queue.
Yep. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring us back to this. I'm going to read the language just for the matter of the public record as what's written on the slide, and then I'm going to go around the horn and sort of, again, call the question for recommendation or direction to staff. And again, we're not treating this as a formal Brown Act compliant action per se. It is a recommendation, or it is a direction to staff as with several others what we've done in the last couple of months. Staff is recommending that the inclusion of a non-de minimis pumper metering program be included in Section 5. Details of the program will be worked out after the GSP is adopted. Direct and immediate outreach will be commenced to the known impacted pumpers prior to the release of the public draft. It will include language clarifying that this is only for larger pumpers within the vicinity of the text. And we are seeking a concurrence from the board on this recommendation to staff. So with that, and in no particular order, I am going to check in with various board members. So Director Perry, and I will say before we go this, we'd encourage you all to either say yes or no, or I can live with it. So you can say yes or aye or no or opposed, or you can indicate that you can live with it if you would like to put that qualifier on it. So Director Perry?
Yes, I can live with it.
Well, no, wait, no. Thanks a lot, Chris.
Yes.
Director Koenig?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Director Koopman?
Aye.
Director Stiles?
Yes.
Director Smalley?
Yes.
Director Angfer?
Yes.
Director Cassidy?
Only with specific clarifying language that reiterates Sigma's not being able to meter de minimis.
Okay, I'm just writing a note. Director Pollock?
Yes.
Director Dills?
Yes.
Director Mahood?
Yes.
And Director McPherson?
Yes, with one point on the fourth point, do we need to identify or what is a larger pumper?
I agree.
Yeah, I'll be clear about. I'll be.
So you'll be defining what is meant by that term, that relative term. Okay.
It's
Okay.
pumpers using two or more acre feet a year.
Okay. So we
Okay.
have unanimous direction to staff with two primary caveats. One, that the language would be very specific in clarifying what is meant by de minimis and any protections that are afforded therein, and ensuring that the relative term regarding pumpers and scale of pumpers, that's included. There's a definition of that. So we have unanimous support with those two caveats. And thank you very much. So with that, Sierra, I'm going to check back in with you. Are there any other further questions or comments that you have?
No, thank you very much. And you'll be seeing this in Section 5 when you get your opportunity to review that.
And I assume that the board will be getting a report in advance of that from the outreach that you'll do.
Yes.
Okay. Just checking. All righty. With that, We are now going to move on to our favorite technical consultant, Georgina King, who is going to provide an overview of the GSP sections.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, well, this is it's called the overview, but it's almost the preview. I didn't know what to call it, but or the sections are going to be coming thick and fast here, and I just wanted to give you a little heads up. That's what this is really. I guess it's a heads up what's coming your way, and so there's section 2 that already went out, section 3 on sustainable management criteria, section 4 projects and management actions, and section 5 that Sierra was just talking about was GSP implementation. So to start with section 2, the plan area and basin setting, you already saw the first draft of that, as much as we could do without completing the model. You saw that last year. And that was 160 pages. Now we've added all the rest, new materials, plus addressed your comments that you had provided for the first draft. And we're up to 239 pages and more figures and more tables and more appendices. So this is really the biggest section of the GSP. And if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, I did highlight in yellow in the table of contents those sections. So if it's like if it says section 3.5, it's everything below 3.5. So 3.5.1 and whatever it goes. There's very many sections. So that one would apply to the water budget. So the things that we have added to section 2 is just more description on the interconnected surface water and the GDEs and listed priority species. We added in the contour maps, which were missing the last time you reviewed them, the water budget and sustainable yield. So I'm just going to go really quickly. We have this nice map, and I wish the other speakers were here to see our nice map. And we looked at where groundwater was connected in the riparian zone, so right by the streams, but then also outside of the streams. So with the terrestrial GDEs, the kind of, I don't know, pinkish light color, that's saying that groundwater levels are generally not within 30 feet of land surface, so that's not going to really support a GDE. So that, and then the blue colors are saying it's 75 to 100%. So this is an interesting map. It's got a lot of good information on it, and I'm not going to talk about the results. We've actually have spoken to you in general about it. It's very connected basin, and so this is the kind of thing that you'll be looking at, this table and the description of the priority species and where they're found. Then these are examples of the contour maps that we've put in there. They have, the color is showing you where that aquifer actually exists in the basin, and then the contours we help, the tool used was the groundwater model to help us see the shape of them, but we've also added real data in there so that you can see what real data is against that. And then there is a section on the change of storage that we had to wait till we had done the water budget. It's kind of a summary of the change of storage from the water budget section. And again, all of these are not because I feel like putting them in, they're all required. And when DWR assesses the GSPs, they have a checklist, like the other agency said they had a checklist. DWR has one too, and even when we submit it, there's online, we have to say exactly when they say, where is your change of storage plot? We have to say which page it is, what figure number it is, and there's a lot of detail we have to give them. So all of this is required. On the water budget, what was required of us was to do a water budget, a basin-wide water budget. But as you know, we went into it by aquifer and a sub-area a little bit as well. And we have very many water budgets. There are, and we're required to come up with a water budget for historical conditions, which is 1985 to 2018, current conditions, which is 2010 to 2018, and then projected, which is, you've seen plenty of those hydrographs. And so then we also have the baseline water budget, which is if we had no projects, and then we also have in the project water budget, which we discuss more in section 4 on the projects and management actions. So I think it's about 45 pages long, but we have those 3 different water budgets over certain periods. And then for each of those 3 water budgets, we have 3 other accountings of what happens to precipitation accounting, what happens to surface water, and what happens to groundwater, whether inflows and outflows for all of those. And then they're broken down by aquifer, and then we did a change in storage by sub area to show where the greatest changes in storage have happened spatially within the basin. So this, I actually had to try and cut it down even more if we were going to do a detailed water budget for the sub areas. It was just going to be hundreds of hundreds of charts and things, and I thought that was too much. So this was a compromise. It's still a lot, but it does help. The reason why I kept it in is because if it helps in managing and understanding the basin, then it's worth having it in there. And then there's the whole section on sustainable yield. Remember, Cameron talked to you about this, and so that has been put in there, describing the sustainable yield approach and the actual table summarizing those values for the different aquifers. And so I'm going to stop here, and after each section I am going to stop. Dave's going to ask if there are any questions, if anyone has anything substantive from their review so far on this one. So Dave, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, so we want to really focus on 2 things here. One is just, as always, any questions of clarification that you want to pose to Georgina. So let's start with that, just so we're staying in a coordinated sequence. So any questions of clarification to what she discussed, and then want to transition into, as Georgina said, any additional substantive comments on section 2 based upon your reviews that you would like to get entered into the record. So Jack, I see your hand up. I'm going to go to you and let you decide if it's a clarification question or you're actually going to move us right into substantive comments.
Yeah, it's really a comment from earlier that I'm reminded of by this section, if I can bring it up. We heard one of the, stop me if it's not appropriate, but we heard one of the speakers say that we shouldn't be just using the 2015 information baseline. And I know we've looked at things a lot of different ways, but have we based anything so far in our draft language on that 2015 baseline?
No, because we are very well aware that they don't like that.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or comments at this time? Okay, let's proceed. And Perrette, if you could lower Jack's hand, or Jack, if you could lower your own hand, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. I'm going to go into section 3 now, which is called sustainable management criteria, but it really is 2 parts to it. The one is the monitoring network, which I actually gave to you already because it is quite a big part, and I wanted to get that to you ahead of time. And I have got comments back from that, so thank you very much. We will be going over some of those comments coming up here. And then the rest of it describes the groundwater level, storage, groundwater quality, and interconnected surface water sustainable management criteria. All the hard work that you've been doing gets put on the significant unreasonable and the minimum thresholds, measurable objectives, and you'll see it's not just I put those in there. There's a lot of backup that goes with it. So that's why it's just the SMC section is over 50 pages. Maybe it's going to be 60 or so. I'm still busy trying to finalize that right now. But when it comes to the monitoring network questions, you know, some of these have been answered, I think, in the previous talk that I had. I gave you on the monitoring network and why we have the wells, that many wells, and who's paying for them, and I think I've covered all of that already. I don't have to go through that. But one good question that came up that I haven't addressed yet is what about trying to use inactive private wells instead of putting in a new well? So yes, it should be inactive. If it's active, that's not a good well because we don't want to have pumping groundwater levels. And so we have looked into this, and actually one of the wells may be a possibility. I've been talking to Dale Pollock, and they have a test well right in an area where it's just north of Bean Creek. It's one of those wells in the San Lorenzo Valley Water District area, and there is already a well there, and that may be something that we take in. But you know, once we start this project, we will look more into that well, go and have a look in the field to see if it's suitable. So yes, we are looking at things like that. I did talk to Rick Rogers about some wells in Lompico, seeing if those were useful. We did that some months ago, well, maybe a year ago now. It's a long time. We did look into that. So that would be our first choice. So I wanted to just mention that. And then the metering program is, so I should say that some of you had already seen this mention of it, because it was in this monitoring network section. And you had some questions about that program. I think you now know more about it, but the new meters, who's going to pay for those? That again gets put into the section 5 on plan implementation. That's going to be figured out there. That's when Sierra says we'll just describe it kind of conceptually. The details will be sorted out later on next year, or whenever they start to go for this. And then on the GDE monitoring, there's comment about, I think 2 people actually commented on, we had something in there about remote sensing. So you're using satellite imagery to look at the health of the vegetation in the basin, and that we would do that every 5 years. But when I wrote that, I could do better. And so your comments made me realize that it wasn't clear enough that every 5 years the analysis gets done, but the data comes in one every year. So we would look at that 5-year chunk. So if you remember, we have to do annual reporting, and that's just a reporting on groundwater conditions in general. And then every 5 years, you're going to kind of look at your GSP and see, is it still doing what you want it to do? Have you learned anything new? Do we have to update it? Are there any more representative monitoring points in there? Should some points be taken out? You kind of reassess the whole thing. And that's when it's a lot more work is done. And that's when we propose to do the 5-year assessment of vegetation vigor. So I will be updating that in that section to be more descriptive of that process. Okay. So when we, for each of the applicable sustainability indicators, and in this basin there's 4, we describe the significant unreasonable. That's about the easiest section of, because we just have the statement that we've worked on with you. And then we have to describe the undesirable results. And then we say what the criteria, what is the numerical description, what are the potential causes, and who does it affect? And so there's many subsections that cover all of these. And we go through each of the possible beneficial uses and saying what the effects might be. So you'll see it's fairly repetitive. And that really, but it all adds to the bulk of this section 3. On minimum thresholds, we're required to, explain what information and methodology we used for both the minimum threshold and measurable objective. Describe that minimum threshold. What is the relationship between one minimum threshold and other sustainability indicators? What are the effects on neighboring basins, on the beneficial uses and land uses? is it in conflict with any federal, state, or local standards? And what is the method of measurement of this minimum threshold? So, you know, a lot of detail is going in here, apart from what we have discussed. Measurable objectives, you just described that measurable objective. You've already described pretty much how you arrived at it previously. And then the interim milestones, which are the every 5-year steps, how it's a kind of a metric to help track your progress. Okay, so that's what you're going to see on sustainable management criteria. If there are any questions, I can imagine they're probably going to be on the monitoring network. If I didn't address anything that people had in their mind to talk about tonight. So Dave, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, opening the floor. Questions, comments? All right, seeing none, hearing none, let's move on.
Okay, excellent. Okay, now everyone's favorite section of the GSP, projects and management actions. I think you have a good idea what's going to go into there. We expect to complete hopefully by June 11th. May be a little delayed up past that, but we're already shooting for that. And in that, you know, there's an introduction describing how this is all falling out in this basin. We're doing a little differently than I've seen in other basins, but because a lot of these projects are very similar. Well, so we've grouped them in by groups based off the first one, the baseline projects, and things that are already happening. I think Kirsten talked to you about these kind of groupings, so this shouldn't be new to you. And then there's the group 2, which is the ones that have had some feasibility study done already, the ones that we've talked mostly about, and those are going to be tiered based off their water source. So if they're obtaining their source water from existing water supplies within the basin, tier 1. If that source of water is from surface water outside the basin, it's tier 2. And if it's a recycled water project, it's tier 3. And then there's the group 3 projects that we will identify and briefly describe that need future evaluation. There's be no feasibility on them. So those would require more work in the future. So that's how they're generally grouped. And you know, so some of them are projects, say one of the recycled water use ones, it could be a 700 acre-foot project, or it could be a 1,500 acre-foot project, or a 3,500 acre-foot project. In general, the things that we have to cover on them are the same. The volume is just different, right? And obviously the cost would be different. Oops. So, oh, I went too far. So what we have to cover for each of the projects is a project description, and this would apply to each of those tiers. A project description, circumstances for implementation. What are you going to do about public noticing? There's all these things. I'm not going to read it all, but there are all these things we have to touch on and have something. And in some cases, we may say we don't have that information. Well, that's fine. The next section, section 5 on plan implementation, is when we get a chance to describe what we're going to do about having a project study happen. And let me see. Okay, yeah. So this is what WSC is working on, and you know, the presentation they gave you is they try to go over some of these things, and so now we're just putting that into the GSP in text form, not PowerPoint form, and providing as much information as we can. And I think it's important that we do acknowledge where we don't have information, but that we do have a plan to address it going forward in the section 5 on plan implementation. And questions there?
Okay, floor's open. Anything? All right, let's continue.
Great. Okay, so plan implementation. Now this is providing us a roadmap how the plan is going to be implemented. And it really can only cover the first 5 years because we don't really know what's going to happen beyond that, right? So we're going to look at how we're going to evaluate funding mechanisms. How is the agency going to be funded? How is it managed and coordinated going forward? How is monitoring going to happen, and the reporting and the DMS? I did talk to you about the regional data management system and reporting, but we have to say, you know, how that we will do an annual report every year, and that there will be 5-year updates. This all has to be put in there. If we miss that, that would be a bad omission. So, and then how do you plan to fill data gaps? In our case here, fortunately, we can say we're filling the data gaps that we have with these 10 wells. And at this point, we don't think we need any other wells, but the other data gap that we do have is that we're really estimating the amount of extraction that happens in the basin. So the metering program comes in here as well. And so then the big one is kind of the big elephant in the room. How are we going to get a project in the basin that helps multiple users and is realistic and can be funded, and all of that stuff that we realized we couldn't achieve within the time frame of getting the GSP together, and we are going to have to work on it next. You are going to have to work on it next year, and the staff of the different agencies. So this is the thing. This is a part of the plan that says, you know, how are we actually going to do all the things that we said we would do in the plan? And that is, we're aiming for everything here about June 11th. So there'll be a lot of things, but you'll have a month or so to read all of these and comment on them. That would be section 3, 4, and 5. And that's what, I'm not going to go over this, but this is basically saying what I just said. But then we also, and the reason is that we need to get things back from you. It looks like about July 2nd, actually, here, is that we need to compile it all into one big document. And now that's when it will be hundreds of pages, and get it ready for your July board meeting, where hopefully you would approve it, and it would go out on for public review. And I'm going to end it there, Dave. Thank you.
Okay, so checking in one more time. Questions, comments? Go ahead, Jeff.
Actually, I want to comment back a couple of sections. It's hard to keep up with the pace of this meeting. It's going pretty fast. Back in section 2, there's a part of it that has been a sore point for me for some time, which has been the claim that private domestic wells are consuming 10% of the groundwater in the area. And the thing is that we've already cut off quite a number of users. We found that a lot of those people that we thought were independent well owners were actually not, but the percentage has always stayed the same, that we're still drawing a lot. And basically the number is that we're drawing very large quantity per household. I mean, I'd have to blow hundreds of gallons a day through my well to keep up with the rate that supposedly the average independent well owner is using. So I was looking at your small water system numbers, which you have hard numbers for. And if I tallied up correctly, there's 394 connections, and you know that they are using 79 acre feet is what I'm seeing here. Groundwater use acre feet, yeah. So that's on page 296. And then, but the private well owners, which have twice as many connections, as I understand it, are using so they have twice as many connections, but they're using almost 4 times as much water based on the estimates.
Right.
Why are private well owners supposedly using a lot more than small water systems?
Yeah, that's an average. that is an average, and in the past the usage was more because of not efficient appliances. So like in 1980s, it was like, I think we have up to 5.5 acre feet per year.
Mm-hmm. The small water systems, are they more efficient than independent well owners? I mean, I've replaced my toilets and stuff already because, you know, wells are hard to keep operating. Several of my neighbors have broken wells. They're struggling with the groundwater. Like you said, a lot of us are in the Monterey, and I get less than 5 gallons per minute out of the Monterey. It's not very good. So.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what the justification is for the independent well owners using twice as much as small water systems.
Yeah, I haven't seen. I can't imagine the table, and you're talking about these numbers. It's all to do with the assumptions that go into it. Obviously, you know that. There are 777 connections in our private well connections in our assumptions. Mm-hmm. And how many do you say the private well owners have? I mean, sorry, the small water systems have?
394, and that includes, I think, some commercial in there. It's on page. I didn't write down the page.
No,
small water systems. They might that include Mission Springs, for example? They have conference centers there at Mission Springs.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
So
yes.
There's some commercial activity there. They have people staying the night there, and
right.
they're getting. So they're being included in that large number, and yet we're still estimated as twice as much as them, and we don't have hardly any commercial activity going on that I know of.
But yeah.
So
I've been saying all along that I think we're a fraction of what you guys have been claiming for our usage. I have a 500-gallon tank, and I can last on it a week. So, and I think Eden's been saying the same thing. They last a long time on a little bit of water.
I could definitely say a data gap is that we don't know how much the private well owners are using.
Right, but we shouldn't assume. Why should we assume that they're using twice as much as small water systems? It's just that's my point I want to make, and I think using small water systems as a guide is at least a better first approximation.
Right. So the small water systems, yeah, we only have had the data since 2015, mm-hmm. and maybe.
You won't see any lawns in my neighborhood. You walk around and people pretty much don't even bother. The deer are all around here. We just there's a few shrubs maybe they water and a couple of plants on their deck. Yeah.
No, I agree. It's not, and if we go off you and Eden, it's not like that is representative of the entire area. We would need to have some kind of study where we go through and do some kind of inventory if we wanted to do something that was a little better than maybe a lot better than what we've done already.
In the absence of other evidence, why can't we just use the small water systems hard numbers? Because they're we already know there's some commercial in there, so we're probably less than that would be my guess. But why don't we just use their numbers? I'd be happy with their numbers.
So
Jeff. Go ahead, Dave.
Regina, go ahead and answer the question in terms of the implications, and then I want to make sure we have a number of other people that are in the queue. So let's see if you can weigh in on, this is one of those kind of, do we report conservatively or more liberally, and what are the implications? So
yeah, the implications aren't, I mean, in terms of the water budget, if you're using less, it probably means that there's more going out to the stream, but the amount that you're using less is within the error of the model of a lot of things, so, and if we looked at the percentage, I don't know if the percentage change is going to be terribly much. You're not getting penalized for having a certain amount of extraction if we overestimated it. It's more the accounting of how things all turn out, and at the moment it's okay. There's groundwater level decline, but it's not an area of where there's private well owners pumping groundwater. So, we can easily write into the plan that we need to, in the implementation, figure out the private well owners usage better.
So just to sum up them, and again, like I said, I feel compelled to get to the other board members, and then if time permits, I can double back around to Jeff. But the bottom line is, notwithstanding, I think what some people would probably agree is an issue of concern that Jeff is raising. There's not a risk of a penalization at this point in time on sort of which one of these assumptions you lean into, number one, and number two, consistent with the whole concept of the monitoring network, the well monitoring network, and the adaptive management nature of Sigma. This is part and parcel of that, which is further enhanced characterization of groundwater conditions over a number of years. So there is not a penalization, and there's absolutely the capacity for further refinement. Am I saying that right in your opinion, Georgina?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go to Eden, and then to Chris, and then to Doug. And then if the time permits, we'll double back around to Jeff for any further comment on this topic.
Yeah. Jeff's point is an important one. I agree, but my comment was just far more general after Georgina presented the 3 different section summaries tonight. It's just, and taking some form that I can understand. It's a working document that we've all been contributing to, and it's just exciting. So
It's starting to feel more real, isn't it? All right, let's go to Chris and then to Doug.
Boy, Jeff, it sounds like you're making a good case for metering the non-de minimis user. De minimis users. Just kidding, but it does sound that way. I had asked that question of Sierra. That was our estimate based on the small water system knowledge that she had. So if you took a system of 5, users on a small system, and you took their meter use and divided it by 5, is it coming out to what our estimate is? And is that generally what we're using? Is it jiving? Is that?
That's current, yes. And the tables are average of many years, where there's been different usage factors applied for the private well owners, and for the small water systems, there was, we inherited the model, and we when we had data, we improved on it. But if we didn't have data, we left it as it was. So those assumptions, only from 2015 did we actually have metered data for them. So before that, we used whatever had been assumptions had been used before in the model.
Right. So
a little complicated.
So what I'm saying is, there's systems that have a easy amount of 5 wells, 10 wells, and if you take their yearly usage and you divide it by 5, and you divide it by boom, third of an acre foot is kind of what it is.
That's currently, yes. After the drought, everyone,
well, it's hard
that usage went down.
So when I started this process, there was 1,100 independent well owners supposedly, and I helped find that 30% of those were not. They were small water systems, but the total consumption by independent well owners stayed the same, because they just raised the amount that independent well owners must be drawing in order to keep the percentage at 10% of the consumption of the basin. So that's suspicious to me, and I want to see the substantiation for those numbers, because we were able to reduce the number of independent well owners by 30% and saw no impact in the total consumption. We're not using old numbers; we're using new numbers that have grown in size during this process per capita, per user.
So to Jeff's request, then, Georgina, is that doable at this point?
Yeah, no, that's doable. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we'll make that as an action item out of tonight's meeting.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You bet. Okay, let's go to Doug, and then to Mark, and then Ruth.
Yeah, and appreciate Jeff bringing this up. I may have gotten lost in the detail, but when I'm looking at the table on page 2-95 in section 2, I do note that the small water systems have water sources that are not groundwater based. And so their total water use is roughly half of the total, what is shown there as the total water use of the private domestic wells. So I don't think the math is as egregiously off as maybe we've been thinking. You know, there's roughly twice as many private well connections, and there's, you know, roughly twice as much total water going coming out of those wells. So that, consistent with the notion of planning conservatively, I don't get too excited about this. I agree that the accounting that Jeff has asked for needs to be done so that, you know, we have intellectual integrity here, but we really are talking about some pretty small numbers.
All right, thank you. Let's go to, well, Mark, you were in the queue. Do you no longer want to be in the queue? You were prior to Ruth.
I'll withdraw my comment.
Okay, doke.
Thank you.
Ruth, go ahead, please.
Yeah, Georgina, I got sort of mixed up when you were talking about the vegetation analysis. So are you saying that there's not going to be any on the ground vegetation surveying?
No, there will be. There will be.
That's going to be the yearly stuff?
Sierra, could you help me here? I'm forgetting the annual walks.
Yeah, so the accretion studies are only every 5 years. That was the stream flow walking. There will be some level of GDE inspections every year, going out doing photo monitoring. Sorry, I'm having some feedback. And obviously the stream gauges are going to be monitored every year, but the accretion studies they're a big undertaking, and also year by year there's not a lot of variation, so we're doing those every 5 years.
And the accretion studies, are they looking beyond animals? Are they looking at the plants?
So that's the GD. We do the accretion studies are looking at really looking at the water around some of the key areas and trying to come up with identifying areas where we know that surface water and groundwater are interconnected, and really verifying that that's still happening. The GDE monitoring is taking place every 5 years as well as part of that process, but it's separate, and that's looking at the representative. In the plan, there's representative monitoring points for GDEs, and we're looking at those every, looking at vegetation vigor, but not specific plant counts, if that makes sense. So we are looking at the vegetation, the health of the vegetation on 5-year increments, but it's not greatly detailed. It's more like a rapid assessment.
But it's on the ground, not
it's on the ground. Yes, yeah. We're not relying solely on the aerial imagery and the satellite imagery, I should say, for assessing the health of the GDEs.
Then they can correlate what they see in the field with those aerial photograph or the satellite imagery, and then can translate back in those other years when they didn't walk it to see, you know, did the indice change over time. It's cheaper doing it that way than going out and walking it every year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And early on there were some San Francisco popcorn flowers, I think, in the in rare and endangered category.
Yeah, and you're right, and good for noticing. They're just really not good wetland indicators of groundwater dependence. So we took them out. They are critical plant species for the area, but they're just really not an appropriate plant to have on a groundwater plan.
So you're going to be mostly just looking at things like willows and such?
Yeah, the riparian habitat, things like rushes and other wetland plants are going to be looked at, and then of course the surrounding trees.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I do not see any other board members in the queue. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and check in with staff. Any questions or comments from staff? All right, hearing none and seeing none, then we'll move on to the members of the public. Members of the public at this point in time, please go ahead and If you're online, please raise your hand, or if you're on the phone, use *9, and Perrette can unmute you. I do not see anybody queuing up.
Yeah, me neither.
All right, so with that, I will now hand things over lastly to, under this section 2.3.2 of today's agenda, to Perrette to discuss the editorial review process, and that will then conclude this agenda item.
I'm going to be really short, sweet and short here, taking you back in the memory lane for those board members that were here. About a year and a half ago, October 2019 was the first time we discussed with you the GSP board review process, and it was very much of a philosophical discussion at that point, because none of us, maybe Georgina had a pretty good idea because she had been through one at least and completed it. But we did not have an idea of how this is going to work and how much reading and how much reviewing and is required and how we're going to make it work. So at that point, we introduced an approach of using editorial reviewers, and we used that approach for reviewing section 1. That was the smallest section. We had 3 board members that volunteered. Jack Dillis, Doug Engfer, and Ruth Stiles, and they have been asking me, when can we get busy with this task again? So one thing that really came to our attention, I talked to Georgina about that, and we would love to have those wonderful board members with eye to detail, and we would love to have their input. But I think just the time frame that we are looking at to have them. And this was not the high-level substantive comments. This was more of a true, going and doing copy editing and helping us to dot the I's and cross the T's. That is not going to really fit, because Montgomery and Associates also has a team member or whole department that does that type of work. And so we were proposing, I talked to those volunteers, asking if they are particularly attached to this task, or if they could be doing it as they are going through and noticing something that is absolutely needs to be corrected on that level at the same time with a content review. So I think we all kind of came to consensus that this approach is no longer practical. You saw the calendar schedule from Georgina when all of those remaining chapters need to be reviewed and back to the consultant for final polishing. So we are recommending omitting the editorial review process. And because it was something that board sanctioned, we would like to have just a quick nod from the board, so the volunteers don't feel like they're just not doing the job. Any questions? Any comments?
Okay, floor is open. Questions, comments? All righty. Seeing none, hearing none, I'm going to recommend to Director Perry, Chair Perry, that we are now going to close out agenda item 2.3.2.
I think, Dave, this maybe is a similar thing that you did with Sarah's, that just doing a quick eyes, or maybe if there's no objections, maybe we can go with if there's no objections.
Okay,
we have a concurrence.
I'm sorry, I wasn't aware that we wanted to do it that way. My apologies. Okay, so yeah, let's go back for expediency. Let me just, I'll call a quick call. Are there any questions? Obviously there are none. Is anybody opposed to this process that Perrette has laid out? Any board members opposed? All right, seeing no opposition, we will therefore conclude that what Perrette has presented will take the form of the process recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. With that, I'm going to hand things over to Director Perry.
Okay, so we have 2.4 fiscal year 2020 proposed budget, 2022 proposed budget. Anyone see anything there that brings about any questions? Or were a couple of small changes, but nothing dramatic? Okay. Seeing nothing from the board, is there anything from the public?
I see no hands up from the public.
Okay, that's great. Okay, we're gonna, do I have a motion to approve the fiscal year 2022 budget?
Langford, I move the budget.
Okay, second?
Second, person.
Bruce McPherson,
Okay.
second. Doug Langford, motioned. Okay, can I get a roll call vote, please?
Yep. Engford,
Aye.
Koenig,
Aye.
McPherson,
Aye.
Cassidy,
Aye.
Koopman,
Aye.
Pollock,
Aye.
Dillis,
Aye.
Mayhood,
Aye.
Smalley,
Aye.
Stiles,
Aye.
and Perry.
Aye.
Passes unanimously.
Okay, fabulous. Then we have 3, 4, 5, 6, none, and none. And item number 7, future, we're gonna do a record retention policy. You guys can read everything there. There's no item of interest. There is no written correspondence. We've got the groundwater conference summit coming up June 9th. It's a virtual event. And
Chair Perry, may I add? So if anybody's interested in attending it, there is a fee for that. We do have that in the budget. I have one director signed up and I have registered myself. If anybody else is interested, please email me and I will do the same for you.
okay, great. And then Georgina, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I would encourage you, as many, maybe if you have time to go to this conference. Our own Sierra Ryan is going to be a panelist, I think, on the second day. I have been involved as a speaker and a panelist, and it's very useful. I'm only going to be attending one day because I have this GSP to write, and it's not a whole day, so it's only like 8:30 to 12:30 or something like that. So it's very manageable, and I'd encourage you to attend.
Dave?
Yeah, I just give it a similar plug. I'll be moderating a panel on day 1, so that'll be on engagement activities. So I think it'll, it's been a good event the last several years.
Dave, do you know if the sessions will be recorded?
I believe that they're going to be, yes.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits of those virtual ones, that if you don't get a chance to participate right at that time, you can go back to them later and listen.
Yeah, it's worth it to sign up for that reason, because then, you don't have to do it on their schedule. Yes.
There was also one other thing, Chris, that I wanted to point out, that I'm encouraging everybody to give a big thank you to Georgina. Georgina is the reason why the meeting is ending almost exactly on time tonight, because for the first time in 3 months this evening, or earlier today, instead of doing what Georgina usually has done, which is, I think it's all going to go really quickly and easily tonight, through significant admonition by Perrette and I, today, very purposely, Georgina said, I think tonight's meeting is going to go incredibly long. She was sort of throwing it out to the universe to just make sure the universe heard her predict that. And it is because Georgina predicted that that we are now, in fact, ending on time. So everybody owes an enormous thanks to Georgina for finally realizing how the universe works.
Mark?
Yes. Could I get an agenda for this GRAC meeting?
Yes,
Where
I
could
will
find that?
email that.
Okay, thanks, Brett.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, Eden.
Director Cassidy concurs. We love Georgina, and motion to adjourn.
Well done, Director Cassidy. Do I have a
I will second both of those.
Okay, yes. And yes, I will also speak for the group and thank Georgina and Dave and all our speakers tonight for their fabulous work. And good job being Nick Perrette And, thank you, everybody. And I'm going to assume that's a unanimous, let's get the heck out of here.
8:30 on the dot.
Oh, wow.
How wonderful is that?
Okay.
Thank you. Have a great Memorial Day weekend.
A few more years and you guys are going to get good at this.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right.